Chapter 2779. Fairy Hongxia was still reluctant to leave. She watched as Xiaohua calmly kept the capital star array spiritual talisman. Only then did she turn around and release her spiritual sense, which circled around Xiaohua. At this moment, a furious spiritual sense came crashing towards her like a tidal wave. At the same time, a sharp sword will rush towards her like 10,000 swords, forcing Fairy Hongxia to retract her spiritual will. Xiaohua looked coldly at the origin of the divine sense. He did not panic and flew into the sky. After identifying the direction, he flew in a different direction from Fairy Hongxia. Facing a swordsman with a sword illusion, Xiaohua was confident no matter how many of them there were. He did not ask Fairy Hongxia and the rest to hide. However, facing a swordsman with a sword illusion, Xiaohua did not have the slightest confidence. Especially since this swordsman was willing to disregard his status and come looking for Xiaohua. Then, the safety of Fairy Hongxia and the rest would be a problem. Therefore, Xiaohua had to make a choice. He was alert in his heart. When he sensed a swordsman approaching, he immediately asked Fairy Hongxia and the rest to leave. He stayed behind to hold back the swordsman. Fairy Hongxia's heart was really like a ball of ice, melted by Xiaohua's courage and care. If not for Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao by her side, she would have stuck to Xiaohua's body and become one with him. Fairy Hongxia even wanted to stay behind and face the furious swordsman with Xiaohua. However, she knew that her cultivation was far inferior to Xiaohua's. She would only be a burden if she stayed behind. What she wanted to do was to grasp the opportunity of this trip to Meng Mountains and increase her cultivation base. She wanted to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Xiaohua as soon as possible, and be able to laugh proudly together with him. Xiaohua flew up into the sky. He didn't use the Imperial Thunder transformation. Instead, he used a simple wind evasion technique and flew towards the direction where the sunlight was rising. The orange sunlight shone on his face, his phoenix eyes were slightly opened, his eyes were filled with spirit, showing off a boundless elegance. That infuriated spirit consciousness swept over from all directions. The moment it came into contact with Xiaohua, it came to a stop. It no longer swept towards the direction of Fairy Hongxia and the others. Evidently, Xiaohua was the target of this sword. Seeing that the swordsman's divine sense had locked onto him and did not chase after Fairy Hongxia, Xiaohua was relieved. But then, he was a little surprised. After all, when he, Li Zongbao, and the other two barged into the Huan Kingdom and killed those second and third grade illusory swordsmen, they left behind traces of their magical weapons. Just from these clues alone, it was impossible to separate Xiaohua from the four of them. There was no reason for him to only chase after Xiaohua and not look for Fairy Hongxia and the others. After all, there were three of them. Oh, I understand. Xiaohua sneered. It must be Qi Qingyi from the Seven Spirit Mountain. Since he used the Celestial Sword's secret manual as a cover to lure the sword cultivators of the Huan Kingdom to come and kill Yi Zichen would not be able to do anything about it. And when I was breaking the Brahma Pagoda's array, I was also breaking the array by myself. How could he not know yours truly's bottom line? Humph. This young master was still kind at that time. I shouldn't have let such a scheming person off that day. But this is good too. Xiaohua thought to himself again. I will transform into a sword, and even attract the attention of other illusory swords. Senior Brother Li and the others will be able to safely pass through the Huan state. Let's meet again after I escape from this sword transformation sword. However, when he thought of escaping from the sword, Xiaohua narrowed his eyes slightly, and there was an impulse in his heart. Hey, I am now in the Jindan realm, and my strength should be comparable to Yuanying realm. If I only think about escaping from this inexplicable sword, wouldn't it be a waste of more than 700 Lingli pills? Xiaohua slightly released his divine thoughts. When it touched the divine thoughts of the sword, he immediately retracted it, and the flying speed was slightly accelerated. After flying for half a cup of tea's time, Xiaohua once again released his Buddha's consciousness. After taking a quick look, he suddenly accelerated his flying speed again. His figure actually turned in another direction. Immediately, in the next half-day, Xiaohua kept changing his direction, and the flying speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Speaking of the experience of escaping, Xiaohua was absolutely first class. He always kept a certain distance from the sword. Finally, there was an endless ice lake in front of him. There was a thick layer of ice on the ice lake, and sometimes there were some broken ice. The blue waves rippled, and there were many huge icebergs between the ice layer and the blue waves. Xiaohua took a deep breath, flew into the ice lake, and landed on an iceberg of hundreds of feet. He put his hands behind his back, turned around, and looked at the distant sky with an extremely calm face. The divine thoughts of the sword were locked on Xiaohua from the beginning to the end, and through the divine thoughts, an undisguised shame and anger was transmitted. It was obvious that the sword was irritated by Xiaohua's almost provocative escape. Although the figure of the sword had not yet appeared, the threatening sword essence was getting closer and closer. The sword origin in Xiaohua's body was stimulated, and Dream Slayer and Mountain Splitter couldn't help but make a sword sound. Xiaohua's body also emitted a faint sword light. The sword really can't be mentioned in the same breath with the illusory sword. Xiaohua slightly sighed in his heart, but at the same time, he had some expectations. A light purple sword brilliance was born in the distant sky, like an extremely gorgeous meteor across the sky. The purple reflected the orange-red sunlight, giving out a sparkling brilliance. This brilliance was like a blooming camellia, and the petals swaying in the wind were the flickering sword energy. At this time, the sky was dotted with white clouds, like sheep leisurely scattered on the grassland, and it was quiet. When the sword energy of the sword appeared, it actually split the whole sky into two halves. The white clouds were smashed by the sword energy and turned into cotton wadding. What killing intent! Feeling the threatening sword essence become colder and colder, like the winter wind wrapping around him, even the power of imprisonment and the desolate killing intent became denser and denser. Not only did the surface of his body feel heavy, even the true essence and sword origin in his body gradually solidified. Xiaohua sneered, and with a clap of his hand, the seal of the ocean appeared. Under the urging of his transcendence energy, the seal floated above Xiaohua's head, and an earthen yellow brilliance sprinkled down, protecting Xiaohua within. Buzz! That purple camellia flower flew several li away. That intense sword humming sound resounded through the entire frozen lake. Fine lines began to appear on the thick layer of ice. Waves began to rise on the water's surface that had yet to condense. Swoosh, countless sword lights sprinkled down, and actually covered the sky above the ice lake. Small camellia flowers actually bloomed all over the sky. However, when the sword howl came to an abrupt end, the camellia flowers had also stopped at a height of 300 m above Xiaohua. The camellia flowers that covered the entire sky flickered and converged towards Xiaohua's location before descending. Strands of fierce sword energy pierced through the camellia flowers and pierced towards Xiaohua. When they were less than 300 m away from Xiaohua, the camellia flowers actually transformed into thousands of rays of sword energy that surged towards Xiaohua's head like a myriad of streams returning to their source. Go! Xiaohua sneered, and pointed his finger. The seal of the ocean that had been accumulating power immediately shone brightly, and suddenly expanded. The coiling dragon on the seal roared, and met the sword lights head-on. Rumble, a violent roar resounded, and at the same time, an intense brilliance was emitted. Waves of energy were emitted from where the magic treasure and sword energy collided, and huge waves of several zhang formed above the ice lake. The thick ice that originally had some cracks had long been shattered, and pieces of ice that were several feet large and several inches small were lifted into the air, then fell into the ice water, and rippled along with the waves. Not bad. As expected of a terrifying phoenix. As expected of Nameless, who shocked Lu Ruochang. This cultivation is worthy of this sword making a move. A thin voice came from the camellia flowers in the sky. Immediately after, the sword intent of the camellia flowers gradually converged, and a beautiful woman wearing a purple sword robe appeared from the sword brilliance. Hiss. Xiao Hua originally had a smile on his face, but when he heard the woman's last sentence, he unconsciously frowned, and his gaze fell on the woman. This woman was in her 20s, but the facial features on her face were somewhat rough, and she had a kind of thick eyebrows and big eyes. Although she looked very pretty, she was far from the kind of little bird that relied on others. Perhaps it was more appropriate to call her a tomboy. He had revealed his illusory sword cultivation in Huan country, but every time he used it, it was a one-hit kill, never leaving anyone alive. Moreover, when he broke the 7 Spirit Mountains Brahma Pagoda formation, he did not use a flying sword at all. He did not know how this sword woman knew that he had sword origin in his body. Chapter 2780. Senior, you're wrong. Xiao Hua said in astonishment, Junior is indeed a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect, and I'm also the so-called terrifying Phoenix. Junior doesn't intend to hide this. Furthermore, when this Junior was passing through the sword tomb, I once said this to a senior who transformed into a sword. How could Junior be a sword cultivator? Moreover, the so-called divine sword secret technique is nothing more than a false accusation by Qi Qingyi of the 7 Spirit Mountain. He wanted to borrow the hands of a group of illusory sword sect disciples to kill Junior. How could he carelessly give such an important secret technique to Junior? If he didn't give it to Junior, can't you snatch it? If Junior really did snatch it, how could he survive? Can he still return alive? Xiao Hua proudly retorted. Yes, yes. The woman nodded vigorously. Qi Qingyi is an illusory sword sect swordsman, and there are many 7 Spirit Mountain swordsmen following him. They even have their Brahma Pagoda formation. Even that can't stop you. And from your tone, you can even kill them all. Tell me, how could this sword not come? This. Xiao Hua didn't expect that he would still leave a bad impression and let this illusory sword sect swordsman feel that something was wrong. If Senior doesn't care about your reputation as a sword transformation senior and wants to deal with Junior, then, there's nothing I can do. As long as Senior doesn't spread the news and doesn't damage Senior's reputation, then it's fine. Xiao Hua said indifferently. Ha ha ha, didn't you just say it? If you were willing, you wouldn't have let Qi Qingyi spread the news about the divine sword secret technique. The woman laughed. Why can't this sword say that? Senior is indeed qualified to say that. Xiao Hua's voice was still calm. However, does Senior have the confidence to keep Junior here? Why can't this sword keep you here? The woman coldly said, even if you have the ability to kill a 3rd stage illusory sword sect swordsman, can you escape from this sword's hands? Junior has no grievances with Senior. If Senior wants to bully the weak, Junior has nothing to say. The true essence around Xiao Hua's body slightly flowed, and his eyes flashed with a trace of excitement. No grievances. The woman sneered. This sword is Xue Mingqiao of the Void Heaven Sword School. Let's not talk about the Dao sword competition, just the fact that you killed my Void Heaven Sword School's Qin Jian is enough reason for me to kill you. I see. Hearing this woman call herself a swordsman of the Void Heaven Sword School, Xiao Hua immediately extinguished the hope in his heart. He pointed at the overturned the sea seal and created several hurricanes to suck in the surrounding spiritual energy. Ha! You're really bold. Seeing this, Xue Mingqiao laughed and said, in the face of this sword, you actually didn't run away, nor did you surrender. You even want to put up a desperate struggle. If you don't have a nascent soul cultivation, who would dare to have such a plan? Wang, at this moment, Xiaohua didn't say anything else. He activated the seal of overturning sea and smashed it towards Xue Mingcha. Xue Mingcha put his index finger and middle finger together and pointed at the air. With a hissing sound, like a sharp sword being unsheathed, a ray of sword light flew out from his fingers and hit the seal of ocean. With a crack sound, the ray of sword light was shattered into pieces. The seal of ocean only rolled slightly in the air and came down again. Not bad, not bad. Xue Mingcha nodded as if he was praising Xiaohua. He looked at the seal of ocean surging with a strong imprisoning force. It set off several gusts of wind and shrouded the space around him. When Xiaohua was still in the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, the seal of ocean was already very powerful. Now that Xiaohua was in the gold core realm, the spiritual energy in his body was as vast as the ice lake under his feet. The power of the seal of ocean had reached another level. The space around Xue Mingcha gradually solidified from top to bottom. Not even the slightest breeze could penetrate it. In fact, when the seal of overturning the sea was about 10 feet away from Xue Mingcha's head, the coiling dragon that had been coiling around the seal suddenly charged out. It roared as it charged towards Xue Mingcha with the seal in its mouth at lightning speed. Its great strength and indescribable power were so great that even a mountain would be smashed into pieces by it. However, Xue Mingcha, who hadn't moved all this time, revealed a mocking smile. Then, sword light shot out from her body in all directions. Every ray of sword light was a sharp flying sword. In an instant, they shattered the confinement of the seal of ocean. Moreover, Xue Mingcha stretched out both hands. 10 rays of sword light flew out from the 5 fingers of both hands and attacked the seal of ocean. With a crack sound, several of the 10 rays of sword light blocked the seal of ocean. The seal of ocean rolled several times and couldn't fall down. The other rays of sword light were even more powerful. With a shwa 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 sound, they actually cut the roaring coiling dragon in half. The shadows flashed in the air and turned back into the shape of a dragon and landed on the seal. The attack of a sword is indeed powerful. Seeing that Xue Mingcha didn't turn into a sword and blocked the seal of ocean, Xiaohua sighed in his heart. The thought of using the Kunlun mirror was also extinguished. However, his body suddenly moved. He flew towards the distance. Where do you think you're going? Xue Mingcha naturally paid attention. Seeing that Xiaohua wanted to escape, she hurriedly waved her hand. Several rays of sword light appeared and surrounded Xiaohua from several directions. He, Xiaohua sneered. His body suddenly disappeared. Oh. Xue Mingcha frowned slightly. Her divine sense swept over like a waterfall. However, the area within 100 feet was empty. She didn't see Xiaohua at all. Xue Mingcha snorted coldly. The sword light around her body shone brightly. Her entire body gradually revealed the outline of a huge sword. Rays of flying swords flew out from the huge sword. It was as if 10,000 arrows had been shot at the same time. Kacha kacha. A series of crisp sounds came from several feet above Xue Mingcha's head. Then, 2 rays of sword light, one green and one red, flew out from the place where the crisp sounds came from. They flew towards Xue Mingcha's neck from top to bottom. The sword light was extremely fast, far faster than the sword light that Xue Mingcha sent out. The 2 rays of sword light even dodged the flying swords. Just as Xue Mingcha's gaze swept across the sky and saw Xiaohua's figure appear there, the green and red rays of sword light pierced between Xue Mingcha's neck. Xiaohua actually didn't escape far away. Instead, he closed in on Xue Mingcha in a moment. When he used the Devil Realm concealment technique, he sent out the spirit-slaying vital light. Gotcha! The green and red rays of sword light flashed. However, the blood light that Xiao Hua expected didn't appear with the flash of sword light. Instead, a light purple sword light appeared on Xue Mingcha's neck, blocking the spirit-slaying vital light outside of the sword light. Not good. This spirit-slaying vital light can't kill a sword. When Xiao Hua saw that the spirit-slaying vital light couldn't do anything, his heart went cold. He hurriedly pointed at the sword gourd and was about to withdraw the spirit-slaying vital light. How dare you! Although the spirit-slaying vital light didn't hurt Xue Mingcha, it really gave Xue Mingcha a fright. In addition to being frightened, Xue Mingcha was also angry. His figure flew up, and his hands that had not yet transformed into swords suddenly stretched out. Two thick sword lights were like pillars as they pierced straight towards Xiao Hua's abdomen. At the same time, the sword light on her body flourished. A suction force was born from the sword light, and it actually sucked in the spirit-slaying vital light. Withdraw, Xiao Hua was shocked. The golden core in his body suddenly surged and rushed into the sword gourd. A layer of silver appeared on the sword gourd, and even the golden threads that never appeared before were faintly discernible. Whoosh! The suction force inside the sword gourd increased greatly under Xiao Hua's urging. Finally, the spirit-slaying vital light was absorbed into the sword gourd. Who's afraid of you? Seeing that the spirit-slaying vital light was withdrawn, Xiao Hua's heart was a little relieved. With a flick of his sleeve, the sword gourd was absorbed into the space. He roared again, and his eyes flashed with fanaticism. He raised the wishful steel staff, and his figure suddenly accelerated towards the sword light. Rumble, a loud noise sounded. Xue Mingcha's eyes showed obvious surprise. Xiao Hua's figure was not blown away by the sword pillar as she imagined. Instead, the thick sword pillar was actually defeated by the wishful steel staff. Xue Mingcha's surprise was only a flash, and then she waved her hands again. The pillar-shaped sword light disappeared, and a wave of sword light rushed towards Xiao Hua like a tide beating the shore. Come on! Xiao Hua roared, and the wishful steel staff also rolled, and like a countercurrent, it flew towards Xue Mingcha. A ray of sword light was shattered, and a piece of sword chi was scattered. Oh, you really have some skills. Although the yin-yang sword gourd was refined by you just now. Xue Mingcha's gaze fell on Xiao Hua's wishful steel staff, and her thin voice now had a hint of a sword cry. But this demonic weapon is very powerful. I'm afraid that the disciples of the illusory sword sect have suffered a lot because of this demonic weapon. It's more than suffering a loss. Xiao Hua sneered. This demonic weapon of this young master is stained with the blood of many swordsmen. Now, I'm going to taste the blood of the illusory sword sect. Ha ha ha, arrogant. It's simply arrogant to the extreme. This sword has never heard of a Dao sect cultivator actually using my sword gourd to kill the illusory sword sect. Xue Mingcha's voice was sharp, and wave after wave of sword flow rushed towards Xiao Hua. The sword flow followed Xue Mingcha's voice and also showed a wave, smashing towards Xiao Hua like a mountain. This mountain and this wave were composed of sword light, and it was somewhat similar to the sword condensing the world in the Golden Destruction Array. However, these sword shapes could only flow and could not be condensed. Obviously, Xue Mingcha's sword cultivation was advancing towards the sword condensing the world. Fight! Xiao Hua was not afraid at all. He waved his arms and rose up in the sword flow. In this way, the two people confronted each other for half a cup of tea's time. Xiao Hua was unable to get close to Xue Mingcha, and Xue Mingcha was also unable to injure Xiao Hua. Seeing that this move was futile, Xiaohua waved his hand and collected the seal of turning the sea in midair. While one hand was still waving the wishful steel staff, the other hand displayed the thunder attraction technique. Kacha, in the sky, the sound of thunder was faintly heard, and a large number of dark clouds pressed down. As expected of the terrifying phoenix. Where is your Dharma body? Xue Mingcha's eyes revealed a trace of dignity as she coldly said. Why would I need to use the phoenix Dharma body to deal with a first-grade illusory swordsman like you? Xiaohua pulled his hand, and several thumb-sized heavenly thunder attraction technique struck the sword flow rushing towards him. Chapter 2781. With a loud rumble, a large area of sword light was destroyed by the heavenly thunder. Xiaohua took the opportunity to fly closer to Xue Mingcha. You want to fight with this sword with just this demonic weapon of yours? Xue Mingcha understood Xiaohua's intention and unconsciously laughed. This sword will let you know the ability of a first-grade sword transformation. Buzz, a fierce sword cry resounded. Xue Mingcha's figure gradually disappeared, and a huge sword finally appeared in midair. Fight! The sword essence in Xiaohua's body suddenly accelerated as Xue Mingcha transformed into a sword. Just like how the soul execution vital light was sucked away by the sword essence felt like it was coming out of his body. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He tried his best to stabilize the sword essence. He didn't use the wishful staff anymore. His hands formed seals, and the thunderbolts and heavenly thunder fell like rain. Rumble, the continuous sound of thunder and the rising and falling lightning struck the huge sword and the surrounding sword light. However, no matter how rampant the lightning was, no matter how the heavenly thunder struck, the sword light of the huge sword was still bright, and even had a feeling of becoming more and more glorious. Is sword transformation so powerful? Xiaohua's mouth was somewhat bitter. At this moment, he already understood that a swordsman who had entered the sword transformation realm not only had an attack power that surpassed that of an ordinary nascent soul cultivator, even the body that had transformed into a sword also had an extremely strong defense. Not to mention that he was not a true nascent soul cultivator. Even if he was, without a sharp magic treasure and attack method, it would be difficult for him to take advantage of this huge sword. Buzz, along with the sword cry, the huge sword transformed by Xue Mingcha moved. The movement of sword transformation was different from the movement of an illusory sword that used a secret technique to forcibly enter sword transformation. An extremely smooth sword arc flashed, and the huge sword had already crossed the sky. Then, like an antelope hanging its horn, a strong confinement and indescribable sharpness crossed the space of more than 10 zhang and fell in front of Xiaohua. Even a feeling of being torn apart was born from Xiaohua's skin. Xiaohua had already seen this kind of sword transformation attack at Chicken Crow Mountain. Although Xue Mingcha's sword transformation was no match for the old man's sword transformation, the power behind this strike was definitely not simple. Xiaohua felt that even if there was a mountain here, this strike would be able to flatten it. However, this power and this confinement were not what made Xiaohua feel the most uncomfortable. What made Xiaohua feel the most was the sword essence around him. It was like a moth flying into a flame. This sword essence was in tune with this sword light, and it was trying to force its way forward. Forget it, Xiaohua understood in his heart that Xue Mingcha had somehow found out that he had sword origin in his body. This sword transformation attack had already taken into account his sword origin. The sword origin that he had forcefully cultivated in the sword catacomb had now become his burden. I'm going for broke. Xiaohua clenched his teeth. Wang wang, at the same time, a sword hum was emitted from Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua no longer suppressed his sword origin. His entire body emitted an intense brilliance, and a heart-shaped greatsword formed around Xiaohua's body. As Xiaohua forcefully transformed into a sword, the suction force of the giant sword was greatly reduced. However, Xue Mingqia's sword light was in front of him again. Xiao Hua did not dare to be negligent. He waved his entire sword light and went forward to meet it. However, just as the sword light flew out, the great sword that Xue Mingqia had transformed into suddenly crossed the space of several tens of feet and appeared within the sword light. Not good. How could Xiao Hua not know that this was definitely a sword transformation divine ability? At the same time that his figure hurriedly flew over, all the sword origin in his body surged out, and he was prepared to meet the great sword that Xue Mingqia had transformed into. Boom! An earth-shattering tremor resounded. The two soaring sword lights really did collide. Not only did the air wave sweep up the surroundings, even all the layers of ice on the ground were shattered by the air wave and the remnant sword light. Several tens of feet of real water waves were lifted up. Not only that, just as the two sword lights collided, Xue Mingqia's greatsword suddenly flashed. The greatsword grew by several feet, and the greatsword that Xiao Hua had transformed into was completely destroyed. Xiao Hua's figure was like a huge rock that was forcefully smashed into the ice lake by Xue Mingqia. Furthermore, the remnant sword qi even went past Xiao Hua and slashed at the iceberg that Xiao Hua was previously standing on. That huge iceberg was like a piece of condensed tofu, and was split into two halves. That powerful force even pressed down the iceberg by more than 2 feet, and then it floated up from the water. As for Xiao Hua, his figure fell into the ice-cold lake water. His Daoist robe had long been torn to shreds, and his body that was as hard as gold and stone had many bloody scars. These bloody scars were like the mouth of a baby. Some were an inch long, and some were a foot long. All of them were filled with flesh and blood. However, although these bloody scars looked extremely serious, not a single drop of blood seeped out. The bloody light only left on the skin, and there was a faint brilliance that wrapped around it. Moreover, these wounds were also slowly shrinking and slowly recovering. However, compared to the injuries on the surface of Xiao Hua's body, it seemed that the injuries on Xiao Hua's body were even more serious. Xiao Hua's body gently floated in the icy water, as if he was a walking corpse without feeling. In fact, it was indeed similar. Right now, his mind was violently shaking, and a kind of invisible sword cry was constantly flashing in his mind. Just now, Xue Mingqia's sword strike not only hit his sword body, but also hit his sword intent and the sword heart that had yet to take shape. The damage from the sword heart directly entered his primordial spirit. Although Xiao Hua's primordial spirit was already separated and independent, his body was still affected. In particular, the sword essence that was originally flowing in his body like mercury was now on the verge of being torn apart. The connection between the sword essence was faintly discernible, and even when it flowed, it was intermittent. As if letting out a long breath, Xiao Hua's tightly closed eyes moved slightly. He was not unconscious, but the feeling of being hit by the sword was really uncomfortable. It was as if the whole world had been turned upside down. His whole body involuntarily turned over and over, but unfortunately, his body did not move. This feeling was really unbearable. Sword transformation, sword transformation. It's really extraordinary. This young master still underestimated sword transformation. Xiao Hua resisted the tearing pain of his body and the nauseating discomfort in his mind, and secretly thought, the reason why sword transformation is because she is a sword. How arrogant was that soul-slaying primary light, but when it touched Xue Mingqia's neck, it was actually unable to cut it. If I were to fight with her with the wishful staff, it would be considered as meeting force with force. But I'm also using my own unformed sword to fight with her. Isn't this like hitting a stone with an egg? In the future, I have to remember that using my own strength to overcome the enemy's weakness is the best strategy. Today's competitive spirit and hot-blooded desire to compete with the blue sky should be used less in the future. At this time, the eagerness in Xiao Hua's eyes had completely disappeared, and was replaced by a kind of regret. However, this regret had just flashed by, and that sharp sword intent was once again born from the surface of the lake. This guy is going to take my life today. Xiao Hua sensed the sword intent and hurriedly shook his incomparably heavy head. He urged his magic power and formed a water-repelling seal, and his figure flew away. That is, just as the magic power in his body surged, a strong confining force passed through the dozens of feet of ice water and directly enveloped him. Not to mention Xiao Hua, even within this dozens of feet range, the extremely fluctuating water ripples from before also calmed down. Although this area of water was not frozen, that kind of solidity was comparable to ice. Wang Wang, the sword origin within Xiao Hua's body let out a mournful wail. Outside the ice lake, a sword hum resounded once again. Following that sword hum, a seemingly illusory yet seemingly corporeal sword chi swayed as it descended. Shwa! Almost ignoring the dozens of feet of ice water, that sword chi directly fell on the top of Xiao Hua's head. Seeing the sword chi chopping towards him, Xiao Hua was scared out of his wits. He did not expect the sword transformation's attack to be so fierce and its speed to be so fast. Even the water-repelling seal could not avoid the confinement of this attack. Even the meridians in his body and the golden core in his lower dantian were firmly suppressed by the confining force, and not a trace of magic power could be used. Moreover, this Xue Mingcha was not like those third-grade illusory swordsmen that Xiao Hua had met before. When she chopped down with her huge sword, the sword transformation's sword force was already contained within it. Xiao Hua was not a true nascent soul cultivator. Not to mention not releasing his pressure, even if he released it, how could he block this huge sword attack? Thinking about the various methods that Xiao Hua currently had, although there were many types and abnormal, if he really wanted to use them to fight against a sword transformation swordsman, it seemed that it would be difficult to use any of them. None of them could be compared to Xue Mingcha's sword transformation's attack. Xiao Hua, who could simultaneously kill 4 third-grade illusory swordsmen, was still somewhat delicate in front of Xue Mingcha. Therefore, at this time, Xiao Hua could no longer care about hiding anything. Wang Wang, the dragon transformation art within Xiao Hua's body was madly activated, and a kacha sound was heard. Within Xiao Hua's lower dantian, the 2 lightning cores within the silver-white golden core emitted violent lightning. These lightning bolts struck Xiao Hua's golden core, causing the entire golden core to rapidly revolve. A huge amount of true essence gushed out from the golden core, and even caused the extremely condensed heaven and earth spiritual chi near the golden core to rush out. Like a torrential flood in a mountain valley, it poured into Xiao Hua's meridians. As soon as this true essence entered Xiao Hua's meridians, it was transformed into magic power. The golden light around Xiao Hua's body flourished, and within this golden light, there were traces of lightning. Wu, a strange sound was emitted from Xiao Hua's body. Xiao Hua, who had already been confined by the sword transformation's power and was unable to move, was suddenly surrounded by lightning bolts. With a raise of his hand, he defeated the confining force, and his figure flashed a string of afterimages along with the lightning bolts, flying towards the surface of the water. Oh! Xue Mingcha's sword was already less than 2 zhang away from Xiao Hua. Under these circumstances, even if he was an early-stage nascent soul cultivator, Xue Mingcha was still confident that she could kill him. However, at this crucial moment, Xiao Hua actually used the lightning evasion technique and forcibly escaped from her sword light. How could this not shock Xue Mingcha? Chapter 2782. Boom! Just as Xiao Hua flew out of the confinement, it was as if a mountain ridge had fallen into an ice lake, or as if countless fireball talismans had exploded inside the ice lake. The sword's shadow flashed, and a wave of several dozen feet high was raised. A space of half a mu in size appeared inside the ice lake, and in this space, Xue Mingqiao's camellia-like sword quietly floated. It was as if she had always been there, and would still be there in the future. The existence of her sword pushed away all the splashes of water. So close. Xiao Hua did not have the time to comprehend the incomparable sword force of the sword transformation. After all, to push away the water of half a mu in size of the ice lake did not only rely on sword origin and sword force, but also the comprehension of the way of the sword. It was far from what Xiao Hua, who had just touched the edge of the sword transformation, could compare with. If he could stay in this sword force for a long time, it would have a crucial effect on him stepping into the sword transformation realm. Unfortunately, compared to his life, this effect was as light as a feather. Xiao Hua let out a sigh of relief in his heart. His figure strangely followed Xue Mingqiao's waves and airflow, rushing out of the water at an incomparably fast speed. With a series of thunderous rumbles, Xiao Hua had already rushed out more than 100 feet. "Where do you think you're going?" A sharp sword cry sounded behind Xiao Hua, and after a series of sword shadows flashed, a 5-feet-long flying sword soared into the sky. It chased after Xiao Hua like a stream of light. The speed of that sword shadow was extremely fast, and it did not seem to be inferior to Xiao Hua's Imperial Thunder transformation in the slightest. "I'm going to die." Xiao Hua saw that Xue Mingqiao was actually chasing after him with one in front and one behind. His Imperial Thunder transformation was actually unable to gain the slightest advantage, and he unconsciously felt his soul fly out of his body. How could he dare to think about anything else? He recklessly activated the Dragon Transformation Art and the Celestial Body Empowerment Technique, while absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, while stimulating the true essence in his gold core, and using the Lightning Escape technique, he rushed forward. Just as mentioned before, when it came to escaping, Xiao Hua was really experienced. Before he had even condensed his gold core, he had already fought with Daoist Jing Ru, who was a nascent soul cultivator. However, at that time, Xiao Hua simply didn't dare to let Jing Ru get close to him. He could only keep a distance of a few dozen kilometers. But this time, when he faced Xue Mingqiao, who was at the first grade transformation sword stage, Xiao Hua was able to retreat unscathed after a head-on collision. He should be proud of himself. What was special was that after flying for half a cup of tea's time, Xiao Hua did not hesitate to change direction. The strange angle and sudden change of direction threw Xue Mingqiao more than 100 zhang away. When Xue Mingqiao changed direction again to pursue, Xiao Hua had already flown several hundred zhang away. In the following half a day, Xiao Hua made countless turns, rushed into the sky, rushed into the ground, and even plunged into the water, all in an attempt to shake off Xue Mingqiao. Unfortunately, Xue Mingqiao was different from Daoist Jing Si. She only maintained her sword form. Regardless of whether it was in the air, on the ground, or in the water, she was not affected by the environment at all. Damn it, this swordsman is indeed powerful. After tossing and turning for half a day, the shaking in Xiao Hua's mind gradually disappeared. That nauseating feeling also disappeared. Although he couldn't escape from Xue Mingqiao's pursuit, Xue Mingqiao didn't attack, so his life wasn't in danger for the time being. His brain began to ponder again. This young master's thunder evasion technique can already catch up to my Imperial Thunder sect master, but I still can't shake her off. What about the nascent soul cultivators of other sects? Don't even mention them. If I really encountered this guy, wouldn't I end up dead? But then again, this young master is only several hundred zhang away from this guy. If she really wanted to kill me, I'm afraid this young master still wouldn't be able to take that sword strike from before, right? While Xiao Hua was secretly astonished, Xue Mingqiao's heart became even more depressed. In fact, Xiao Hua's thoughts weren't completely correct. Although the flying sword of a sword cultivator was extremely fast, far faster than cultivators of the same level, compared to the thunder evasion technique of the Imperial Thunder Sect, there was still a gap. An ordinary second-grade sword transformation stage swordsman might not necessarily be able to catch up to Xiao Hua. Because this Xuemingchao's flying sword was somewhat special, her flying speed was also much faster than ordinary swordsmen. This was also one of the reasons why she chased after Xiao Hua from so far away. But she didn't expect Xiao Hua's thunder evasion technique to be so powerful. Even if she used all of her sword origin, she still couldn't catch up to him. Now that she thought about it, Xiao Hua landed on the ice mountain not because he couldn't escape, but because he was waiting for her. This kind of waiting was either to give the other 3 Foundation Establishment stage swordsmen a chance to escape, or it was consistent with Xiao Hua's actions. Xiao Hua wanted to kill her. Thinking that Xiao Hua wanted to kill a first-grade sword transformation stage swordsman like her, Xuemingchao sneered in her heart. If it wasn't for the cultivation of a middle nascent soul stage swordsman, it would be impossible to break through her sword transformation stage defense. Otherwise, it would be impossible to talk about injuries. And in the short fight just now, Xuemingchao had already ascertained Xiao Hua's strength. He was only at the early nascent soul stage, far from being her opponent. However, even if Xiao Hua wasn't Xuemingchao's opponent, Xuemingchao wanting to kill Xiao Hua was the same as Xiao Hua wanting to kill Xuemingchao. It could only be an idea, but it couldn't be realized. Of course, Xiao Hua wanted to kill Xuemingchao, but he didn't have the strength. But if Xuemingchao wanted to kill Xiao Hua, she had the will and the strength to do so, but the timing wasn't right. Yes, Xuemingchao was following behind Xiao Hua, and her divine sense had also locked onto Xiao Hua. However, her sword origin had been completely activated, and nearly 80% of it had been invested into the flight of the flying sword. Even if the remaining sword origin could be used to launch an attack, Xuemingchao understood in her heart that as long as she launched an attack, her flying speed would definitely be slowed down. And in the process of slowing down, Xiao Hua would have to fly extremely far away again. Moreover, whether Xuemingchao's attack would be effective or not, she herself wasn't sure. Didn't she see how Xiao Hua had dodged the previous head-on attack and the attack that Xuemingchao was extremely confident in? At this time, Xuemingchao was relying on the fact that the sword origin in her body was far superior to Xiao Hua's. She was waiting for the true essence in Xiao Hua's body to be exhausted. Once the true essence was exhausted, the golden core wouldn't be able to provide any magic power. Xiao Hua's flying speed would slow down, and that would be the moment Xiao Hua would die. This idea was naturally a wise move for a high-level swordsman like Xuemingchao, and it was the same for Daoist Jing Ru in the past. However, the early nascent soul stage Daoist Jing Ru couldn't catch Xiao Hua decades ago. Could the current Xuemingchao do it? After flying like a headless fly for several days, Xiao Hua gradually had a plan in his heart. He also understood Xuemingchao's difficulties. As for himself, he had the heavenly infusion technique to draw in the spiritual qi of heaven and earth from the outside world, and the dragon transformation art to refine the spiritual qi. He didn't even need to activate the golden core in his dantian. Instead, he could rely on medicinal pills and spiritual herbs to support the lightning evasion technique. Moreover, this kind of crazy activation of the technique was also a kind of test for Xiao Hua's newly created technique. It was also a kind of tempering for Xiao Hua's other set of meridians that hadn't fully matured yet. Xiao Hua even thought of chasing after Xuemingchao like this until his golden core realm was completely stabilized before escaping. However, when he thought of Fairy Hongxia's concern, Xiao Hua decided to take a risk. He would first shake off Xuemingchao, then head to the place where he had agreed to meet Fairy Hongxia in advance. After flying for another half a day, another ice lake appeared in front of him. This ice lake was very similar to the ice lake from before. Moreover, there were ripples on the surface of the lake, and there were very few icebergs. Xiaohua's heart stirred, and he suddenly plunged into the ripples. Xiaohua had used this kind of trick many times in the past few days. When Xuemingcha's divine sense moved, she didn't even think about it. Her flying sword also turned around and chased down the ice lake. With a loud boom, Xiaohua rushed into the blue water, and in an instant, the icy water rose several zhang. The waves rushed into the air, and a string of water droplets appeared. These water droplets reflected a colorful brilliance under the clear sun. However, Xuemingcha didn't care about this moment of beauty. Her sword flashed, and in an instant, she rushed into the blue water. However, just as she entered the water, and before the waves even fell, the divine sense that Xuemingcha released was suddenly blocked. The divine sense mark that locked onto Xiaohua also disappeared. It was as if Xiaohua had never appeared. Xuemingcha was greatly alarmed, and she hurriedly released her divine sense to search again. However, just as her divine sense swept out 10 zhang, she immediately felt that something was wrong. Because in her divine sense, there wasn't only icy water nearby, but there were many inexplicable things, whether it was foothills, or scenery, or indescribable cultivators, or countless swordsmen. Not good. When Xuemingcha saw this, how could she not know that she had fallen into Xiaohua's trap? She hurriedly retracted her divine sense. However, when she retracted her divine sense, countless scenes flashed before her eyes. It was as if her divine sense had extended forward again. It wasn't retracting as she thought. Xuemingcha didn't dare to hesitate anymore, and hurriedly used a secret technique. However, she felt a sharp pain in her mind, and the divine sense that swept out was cut off by her. At this time, the several zhang of blue water that Xiaohua stirred up had already fallen, but the space within several zhang of Xuemingcha was enveloped by a layer of innate primordial water that was as thin as a cicada's wing. Wang. Xuemingcha didn't reveal her physical body, and her entire sword let out a buzzing sound. Clearly, she was extremely angry. The sword light flashed, and the sword ray mixed with angry sword chi rushed into the innate primordial water. Xuemingcha actually wanted to destroy the innate primordial water at the risk of her sword being damaged. Boom! The innate primordial water was indeed broken by Xuemingcha, and when the innate primordial water landed on the sword, it quickly corroded the sword light like thorns, and in an instant, some parts of the sword light were annihilated. However, that wasn't all. In the gaps between the innate primordial water droplets, wisps of spiritual fire also appeared, and landed on the sword light. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The sound was also extremely soft, and the sword light was actually ignited by the spiritual fire. Damn it. Xuemingcha urged her sword origin, and tried her best to resist the corrosion of the innate primordial water. Her divine sense swept out again, and she already saw that Xiaohua had already flown several li away. Chapter 2783. I must kill this bastard. Xuemingcha was enraged at the thought of being injured in front of a cultivator. She cursed Xiaohua in her heart. Just as she was about to activate her sword origin and soar into the sky again, she suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain from her back. When she scanned her back with her divine perception, she found that a thumb-sized flame had already ignited the sword light on her back. Moreover, the fire seemed to be spreading. Is this the innate true fire? Xuemingcha was scared out of her wits. She didn't expect Xiaohua to have innate true fire in the innate true water. Moreover, this true fire could actually ignite her sword light. Since this true fire could ignite the sword light, then the sword origin must be able to ignite it as well. And could she not be ignited as well? The most important thing was that when the flame burned the sword light, there was a bone-eroding pain. This pain forced Xue Mingcha to escape from the sword transformation realm. This was something Xue Mingcha didn't dare to imagine. However, how could Xue Mingcha dare to escape from the sword transformation realm? She could only activate her sword origin. Her body glowed brightly, and the sword light pierced the bottom of the flame, stopping it from spreading further. However, the sword light was only stopped for a moment. The sword light was ignited by the flame again, and the fire grew even stronger. Xue Mingcha suddenly thought of the innate true water that trapped her just now. Without hesitation, she rushed over again, wanting to use the innate true water to extinguish the spirit fire. Unfortunately, when the innate true water landed on the spirit fire seemed to be nothing. It even ignited the innate true water. This isn't the innate true fire. Xue Mingcha was shocked. When she realized that this strange flame wasn't the innate true fire, she panicked even more. This was something that could ignite the innate true water. How could she let it wreak havoc on her body? Xue Mingcha gritted his teeth. The sword light around his body flashed again, and the huge sword appeared again. However, this huge sword only appeared for a brief moment before it quickly shrunk. A slender camellia flower emerged from the light of the huge sword. The camellia flower fell into the air, and gradually revealed the figure of a naked woman. When the sword light faded away, Xue Mingcha, who had changed into another set of purple sword equipment, appeared with an ashen face. Xue Mingcha didn't have time to check the situation at the scene and immediately released her divine perception. As expected, there was no trace of Xiaohua within 100 miles. If it wasn't that Xiaohua was flying too fast, then it was that Xiaohua had used a concealment technique. But no matter what, with Xue Mingcha's ability, it was already no different from ascending to the heavens if he wanted to discover and catch up to Xiaohua now. This bastard is too cunning. Xue Mingcha unwillingly used her divine sense to scan the area in front of her again and again. Only when she felt that she had really lost track of Xiaohua did she fiercely retract her divine sense. At this moment, her divine sense was still somewhat painful. This fire. The sword light that Xue Mingcha shed should have disappeared a long time ago because it didn't have sword origin. However, under the attachment of the spiritual fire, it continued to burn for a while. At this moment, Xue Mingcha looked again. Not only did the sword light disappear, even the spiritual fire had turned into a tiny wisp. This wisp of spiritual fire could only be seen with the naked eye, and Xue Mingcha's divine sense couldn't detect it. This fire doesn't seem to be as powerful as I imagined. Xue Mingcha suddenly realized something, and her heart was somewhat ashamed and angry. This bastard Xiaohua is really cunning. He actually set up this thing after using the innate true water. So it was to set up a maze. And this sword actually used the golden cicada shell shedding secret technique and damaged the sword origin. But, if this sword didn't use the secret technique, how could it escape from this mysterious fire? Seeing the spiritual fire slowly fall down like a thin feather, Xue Mingcha's heart moved. She clapped her hands and took out a sword-shaped container from her chest. She pointed her finger, and the small sword flew under the spiritual fire. The tip of the small sword was an entrance, and she quietly waited for the spiritual fire to enter the container. However, something strange happened. That wisp of spiritual fire didn't seem to be material at all. It actually escaped from the small sword and slowly fell into the blue waves below the small sword. What kind of fire is this? Xue Mingcha was somewhat dumbfounded. She naturally knew that there were many strange things in the Dao sect, but she was still a sword. What kind of things hadn't she seen before? However, this was the first time she saw a spiritual fire that looked even stranger than the innate true fire. After using several methods to collect the spiritual fire, Xue Mingcha completely gave up. She really didn't understand how Xiaohua kept and used this item. However, when she glanced at the innate primordial water that had shrunk into a few drops in mid-air, a smile appeared on Xue Mingcha's face. Fortunately, I didn't make a wasted trip this time. This sword needs innate true water to refine the sword body, and this Xiaohua actually sent a few drops. Speaking of innate true water, the matter of the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain was definitely caused by this bastard Xiaohua. Not only does this bastard have the Yin-Yang sword gourd, he also has innate true water. Where did he get it from? Sword Master Chong is really too much. He left a good innate true water and didn't let this sword take it. Now it's a mess because of that bastard. At this point, Xue Mingcha pointed her finger, and several sword lights flew out. They nimbly caught the few drops of innate true water and slowly sent them into the small sword-like container. Xue Mingcha frowned. However, what kind of elixir is Sword Master selling in his gourd? Not only did he not chase after Xiaohua, he even revealed this matter. It's as if the matter of the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain never happened. This is really troublesome. Why should this sword think about these troublesome matters? How many things are done by Sword Master's group of third-grade transformation Sword Masters? This sword doesn't need to go to the battlefield of the Great Sword War. The corner of Xue Mingcha's mouth curled up. She waved her hand and caught the small sword-like container. After carefully putting it away, she released her divine sense again and scanned the surroundings several times. Only then did her body release sword lights and soar into the sky in a certain direction, quickly disappearing. After several days, Xiaohua's figure strangely appeared in a place dozens of li away. This position was not only the direction Xiaohua had fled in, but the place was also very obvious. It was an ice mountain in the middle of an ice lake. In fact, after Xiaohua released the innate primordial water and spiritual fire, his Buddhist consciousness had been left in the ice lake. Seeing that Xue Mingcha had fallen into the innate primordial water, he immediately urged the true origin in his gold core to increase his speed. When Xue Mingcha's divine sense swept over again, he had already crossed the ice mountain. When Xue Mingcha discovered the spiritual fire, she didn't have time to follow Xiaohua. Xiaohua immediately withdrew his Buddhist consciousness and quickly flew back, hiding in the ice mountain. Xiaohua's concealment technique, the capital star array, and the maze he had set up, allowed Xue Mingcha to release her divine sense between dozens of li and hundreds of li. She simply didn't sweep this ice mountain. Alas, what a pity for those few drops of innate primordial water. Xiaohua flew above the ice lake and collected the spiritual fire that had fallen into it. He whispered with some regret, however, this young master's cultivation is still a bit lacking. I originally thought that with gold core, I would be able to fight Reverend Jing Si. Looking at it now, it's better to be careful. If I can avoid that guy, it's better not to. If I really see him, it's better to run away as soon as possible. Following which, Xiaohua raised his head to look at the position of the sun. After identifying the direction slightly, he flew towards another direction. The astronomical phenomenon in the extreme north of Huan country was rather strange. In the beginning, the alternation of the sun and moon was normal. However, as one went deeper, the day and night gradually lengthened. In the end, the night and day would often not alternate for dozens of days. Now, it was daytime. After Xiaohua parted ways with Fairy Hongxia and the rest, the pale white sun had been hanging in the east without any movement. Xiaohua was originally a directionally challenged person. At this moment, it was already not easy for him to identify the direction by looking at the position of the sun. However, Xiaohua was still wrong. Although the sun had been hanging in the east and didn't seem to have moved, how could it not have moved for dozens of days? If it was a sword cultivator, they would definitely calculate and see which direction the sun was in. Then, they would fly towards the place they wanted to go. Furthermore, the other party would have other methods to determine the direction better. They would definitely not use the direction of the sun from dozens of days ago as the direction of today. Therefore, Xiaohua's flight was naturally different from the direction Fairy Hongxia and the rest were heading towards. Xiaohua flew for several days and didn't see any trace of Fairy Hongxia and the rest. However, he wasn't in a hurry. After all, he was fighting with Xue Mingcha and flew extremely far away. Fairy Hongxia and the rest shouldn't be flying too close. However, after flying for dozens of days, seeing that the sun in the east was gradually setting, Xiaohua muttered in his heart. Could it be? I was wrong again. Even if the three of them were rushing non-stop, with Ai's escape technique. I should have found them long ago. Xiaohua originally wanted to find a swordsman to ask about the location Fairy Hongxia mentioned before they left. However, in these dozens of days, he actually didn't meet a single person. I've really seen a ghost. Xiaohua thought helplessly. Previously, I didn't want to meet any sword cultivators. However, there were dozens of them. They were dozens of illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen who didn't care about their lives and sent themselves to death. They even sent an old woman who was a grade 1 swordsman. They almost took this young master's life. Now, there's no need for any illusory sword cultivators. Can't any of them come out? Xiaohua helplessly flew in mid-air and released his spiritual will and Buddhist awareness, hoping to find one or two figures so that he could find traces of Fairy Hongxia and the rest. Back then, when Fairy Hongxia and the rest were forced to part ways with Xiaohua, they fled into the distance. Especially when Fairy Hongxia's spiritual will was near Xiaohua and was forced back by Xue Mingcha's spiritual will. Although she didn't suffer any injuries, that sharp sword-like spiritual will left a deep impression on Fairy Hongxia. Chapter 2784. Furthermore, after Fairy Hongxia and the rest had flown more than 10 li away, Xue Mingcha's spiritual sense still chased after them. That spiritual sense scanned the three of them coldly, and even scanned Li Zongbao many times. However, after Xiaohua flew far away, Xue Mingcha did not dare to stay for long, and only then did he retract his spiritual sense. Seeing this, Li Zongbao understood that Xue Mingcha's intentions were different from those illusory swordsmen. He was not here to snatch the divine sword's secret manual, but to find trouble with them. Li Zongbao thought of this, so did Fairy Hongxia and Xiao Mao. Fairy Hongxia was even more worried about Xiaohua. Although she knew that he already had the strength of an early nascent soul stage, but he was facing an illusory sword after all. Unknowingly, Fairy Hongxia's flying speed slowed down. Seeing this, Xiao Mao looked at Li Zongbao, whose face was as cold as ice, and could only fly to Fairy Hongxia and whisper, "Senior sister. Big brother's cultivation." I don't know, but how could senior sister not know? He could easily kill 4 illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen. If he really met an illusory sword, he might not be at a disadvantage. Fairy Hongxia knew that Xiao Mao's words were reasonable, but she was still worried. She sighed and did not say anything, and turned back to look in the direction that Xiaohua disappeared. Xiao Mao wanted to say something, but seeing Fairy Hongxia's absent-minded look, he did not know how to comfort her. Junior sister. Li Zongbao's voice entered their ears. Even if you look back 1,000,000 times, you still can't see Xiaohua. Even if you think about it 1,000,000 times, you still can't help Xiaohua. What you need to do now is to raise your cultivation. Only when you are pregnant and become a grandmaster, can you be Xiaohua's assistant. Only then can you be qualified to worry about Xiaohua. Saying this, Li Zongbao clapped his hands and took out his beloved immortal slaughtering whip. He said in a calm and even somewhat jealous voice, "Look at this spiritual weapon, immortal slaughtering whip. Although I have never seen a spiritual weapon before, I can clearly feel that this item is mine, and mine is this item. This feeling is many times stronger than the immortal piercing whip. If this item is not a spiritual weapon, then what kind of treasure is it? Xiaohua, who can even refine such a spiritual weapon? You. If you don't raise your cultivation, how can you stand shoulder to shoulder with him? Don't you see that Imperial Thunder Sect disciple called Shui? Although she has something to do with Xiaohua, she has only been cultivating in seclusion. Even when Xiaohua went to Sky Patrol City to fight, she didn't come out to send him off. Do you think she doesn't want to? She did that for the sake of the future, for the sake of being together with Xiaohua better. Junior sister's current cultivation can't even be compared to me. Even if you can fly to Xiaohua's side, what can you help her with? The reason why you came all the way to Meng Mountains is to look for an opportunity. Xiaohua lured away the transformation sword. Didn't he also want you to fulfill your wish? Now that you've lost your soul and are worried about Xiaohua, what should you do? If you were Shui of the converted Thunder Palace, I'm afraid you would have already accompanied Xiaohualai in his Dao sword battle, right? Not only are you unable to cultivate in seclusion by yourself, you're even being protected by Xiaohua. Moreover, there's an even greater possibility that you'll perish in the great battle between Dao cultivators. How could you still have the carefree life of Xiaohua? Sometimes, when you lose something, you know how precious it is, Li Zongbao sighed. His words were obviously meant to provoke her, and Fairy Hongxia understood it when she heard it. However, when Shui was mentioned, Fairy Hongxia's competitive spirit was uncontrollably born. She cupped her fists and said, "Thank you, senior brother. I understand now. I'll definitely keep senior brother's words in my heart." Actually, with Xiaohua's cultivation base, he'll definitely be the brightest star in the great battle between Dao cultivators. However, he's been hiding it all this time. He must have his own secrets and difficulties. Therefore, in the future, in my opinion, the two of you will spend less time together and more time apart. If the two of you are of the same mind, then you should have the mentality of seeing the world as close as a stone's throw away. Junior sister's mentality right now is not good. Yes, junior sister understands. Fairy Hongxia nodded again. Moreover, Xiaohua. In my opinion, his other divine abilities might not be able to catch the eyes of sword transformation. However, his ability to escape is definitely at the level of a mid-late nascent soul cultivator. Sword transformation may not be able to catch up with him. You don't have to worry today, and you don't have to worry in the future as well. We just have to hurry to mount millions of Meng Mountains. I'm sure it won't be long before he catches up with us. Yes, junior sister understands. After hearing Li Zongbao's words, Fairy Hongxia was still a little worried. However, she also understood that Li Zongbao's words were true. She was simply worried about Xiaohua, and that was the inferior choice. Only by increasing her own cultivation base and not worrying Xiaohua, and being able to help him, that would be the superior choice. It's better to forget each other in the pugilistic world than to help each other in times of need. I'm afraid this is what it means. Fairy Hongxia suddenly thought to herself. Seeing Fairy Hongxia's thoughtful expression, Li Zongbao did not say much. This kind of thing would have to depend on Fairy Hongxia's own understanding. The only thing he could do was to remind her. After flying for another 10 days, Xiaohua still did not appear. As a result, Fairy Hongxia was not the only one feeling uneasy. Even Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao were surprised. Unfortunately, before they could stop and wait, a third-grade illusory sword divine sense swept over from the front. As soon as it discovered them, it immediately locked onto them. Without Xiao Mao, the highest cultivation base among the three was only at the late foundation establishment stage. Moreover, Li Zongbao's immortal slaying whip was still being nourished and could not be used. The three of them were no match for any illusory swordsman, let alone a third-grade illusory swordsman. Sensing this divine sense, Li Zongbao's expression suddenly changed. He hurriedly pointed behind and said, "Quick, we don't have to go forward anymore. Let's turn back quickly. If we can meet Xiaohua, it's fine. If not..." Without waiting for Li Zongbao to finish his words, Xiao Mao immediately turned the flowing cloud airship around, activated all the spiritual power in his body, and flew in the direction where the three of them came from. Li Zongbao was right, but he forgot that Xiaohua was the best at getting lost. Even if they flew to the place where the four of them separated, how could they find Xiaohua again? Moreover, would the third-grade illusory swordsman give them a chance to meet up with Xiaohua? The flowing cloud airship had only flown for half a day when Li Zongbao's divine sense discovered the dark-faced sword cultivator chasing after the airship. Not only that, when Li Zongbao sensed that the swordsman was approaching him, another 5 strands of divine thoughts swept over from the direction where the swordsman came from. After discovering the airboat, the 5 strands of divine thoughts disappeared again. When the divine thoughts swept over the airboat again, Li Zongbao found that the 6 swordsmen of grade 3 illusory sword had surrounded the airboat and were closing in on it in a fan-shaped formation. Maybe, we really can't fly back. Li Zongbao retracted his divine sense, and his face was extremely ugly. He pointed at the 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen and said, "These 6 illusory swordsmen are obviously afraid of junior brother Xiao. They also saw our intention to fly back, and now they have surrounded us, blocking our way from the side. The 3 swordsmen who are flying side by side with the airship are obviously flying very fast. They are chasing after the airship and outflanking us from the side. It seems that they are trying to stop us from flying back." Xiao Mao's divine sense was far superior to that of ordinary cultivators. At this time, he also realized that something was wrong, and his face was also pale. Fairy Hongxia knew that her divine sense was not as good as Li Zongbao's, so she did not release her divine sense. Instead, she said calmly, "Since we can't fly back, then we can only fly in the direction away from them. As long as we can keep a distance from them. Let's go." Li Zongbao's body flashed brilliantly, and he poured his magic power into the flowing cloud airship. The flowing cloud airship accelerated again, and flew in another direction. Although Li Zongbao and the others tried their best, and the airship kept changing its direction, the 3 of them were, after all, just cultivators of the foundation establishment stage. Under the pursuit of 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen, they were still unable to catch up. In just a few days, the 6 swordsmen's figures were already in sight. In fact, according to the speed of the 6 swordsmen, they could have caught up with the airship 2 or 3 days ago. But for some reason, perhaps they thought that the 3 of them were like turtles in a jar, so they slowed down their speed. Seeing that the 6 swordsmen were only 2 or 3 miles away, Li Zongbao sighed softly in his heart. The 3 of them were really insignificant without Xiaohua. He looked up at the direction where Xiaohua should have come from, clapped his hands, and took out the immortal slaying whip. He whispered, "Junior sister, let's meet the enemy." "Oh. Okay." Fairy Hongxia hesitated for a moment, and then withdrew her hand from the control of the airship. She said, "Senior brother, it's better not to use the immortal slaying whip now." "Why?" Li Zongbao frowned slightly. "This item. Although it's a spiritual weapon, it's currently being cultivated, so it can't be used as a spiritual weapon. Moreover, if senior brother rashly uses it, the illusory swordsman might notice that something is wrong, and covet it. Even if they won't really kill us now, and maybe take us as hostages. With this item, we might not be able to keep our lives. Oh, Li Zongbao nodded slightly. He didn't have any suitable magic weapons, so the first thing he thought of was the immortal slaying whip. Hearing Fairy Hongxia's words, he knew that she was right. After thinking for a while, he raised his hand and kept the immortal slaying whip, and took out the yin-yang ring. He turned to Xiao Mao and said, "Junior brother Xiao, you guard this airship. There's no need to fight. We won't leave this airship either. Our main goal is to escape." "Yes, junior brother understands." Xiao Mao had originally stood up, but now he could only sit down. "Kaka. There are only 3 little kids here. Where's the horrifying phoenix?" A fierce voice came from the horizon. It was the Grade 3 illusory swordsman who had first discovered the airship. Following that, a voice that was neither loud nor soft said coldly, "Left sword. Who cares where the horrifying phoenix went? Capture these 3 kids, aren't you afraid that the horrifying phoenix won't show up?" Chapter 2785. Li Zongbao looked around and saw that the voice belonged to the only female swordsman among the 6 swordsmen. She was also the fastest and was less than a mile away from the flying boat. "Huang Ping. We've already searched the surrounding several hundred miles, but we didn't find any trace of the terrifying phoenix. Furthermore, these 3 brats are actually behind us on the flying boat. Could it be that we have already caught up to it? That terrifying phoenix escaped somewhere else. Why are you asking me?" Huang Ping said calmly, "Let's capture these 3 and interrogate them carefully. Leave the interrogation to this old man." Another valiant sword cultivator approached and sneered, "My High Wind Sword sect has a grudge with this Dao sect cultivator. The reason why I interrogated the 3 Dao cultivator disciples who fought in the battle was to vent the anger of the fallen disciples of the Sword region. Wang Jingqiang. Your methods are too ruthless. Let me do it." On the other side, a scholarly-looking swordsman said eerily, "This chick won't be able to withstand your vicious attacks. It would be a pity if she were to fall." Fairy Hongxia's expression changed when she heard that, even though she knew that they were just trying to scare her. "Attack!" Li Zongbao had been holding back for a long time. When he saw the 4 swordsmen approaching while the other 2 were still some distance away, he shouted and threw out the yin-yang hoop. The yin-yang hoop was a Dharma treasure used by Heng Zhao in his early years, so it was quite powerful. As the yin-yang hoop flew out, 2 rays of red and green light flew out from the hoop, transforming into 2 rings that shot towards Sui Jian, who was closest to the flying boat. "Hee, I haven't made a move all this time because I feel like I'm bullying the younger generation. But now, you dare to provoke me first. Then I won't hold back." As Sui Jian laughed, he waved his hand and a silver-white sword light shot out from his left hand. The moment the sword light entered the air, it immediately turned into specks of stars. Each speck was a dazzling sword light, and these specks of stars descended on the green and red rings. Clap, 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 like cold water falling into a hot pot, every bit of sword light that fell on the ring emitted a strong brilliance and sword chi. That huge impact force shattered the ring. When the green and red rings disappeared, the remaining starry sword essence suddenly gathered together with the sword technique of the left sword, turning into a full moon that rushed straight toward the yin and yang ring in midair. Oh no! The genuine essence around Li Zongbao trembled violently, apparently affected by the backlash of the yin-yang hoop. As he cried out involuntarily, he hurriedly activated the yin-yang hoop. With a loud boom, the moon-like sword essence hit the center of the yin-yang hoop. The yin-yang hoop flashed with a strong green-red brilliance to resist, but the green-red brilliance was too inferior to the full moon sword essence and almost collapsed upon contact. The brilliance of the yin-yang hoop faded, and it was sent flying into the air by the fierce sword chi. The sharp sword essence once again transformed into a meteor and shot towards the flying boat. The gap between the late Foundation establishment stage and the third-grade illusory sword was so huge. Fairy Hongxia was helpless. She raised her shoulders and an ice phoenix celestial body flew out. A phoenix cry resounded in the air. Hee, this is a female phoenix. When Zhuo Jian saw Fairy Hongxia's ice phoenix celestial body, his eyes narrowed into slits. If we capture her, we won't have to worry about the terrifying phoenix handing over the divine sword secret manual obediently. Wu, the ice phoenix spread its wings, and a hurricane blew out from between its wings. The wind blades that could blow boulders into the air were a joke in the eyes of the third-grade illusory swordsman. Sword radiance of different colors flashed around them, and they easily blocked the wind blades. Even the sword essence that flew close to them was not affected by the wind blades. Whoosh, the ice phoenix celestial body opened its mouth, and a thin layer of primordial water was spat out, blocking the sword essence. Tut tut tut, with a muffled sound, the sword essence rushed into the thin layer of primordial water, and disappeared after a slight ripple. Primordial water. As soon as Zhuo Jian's divine will came into contact with the primordial water, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He quickly retracted his divine will and was overjoyed. Fellow swordsman, I was the first to discover this primordial water. I have the right to claim it first. As he spoke, Zhuo Jian pointed his finger again, and a sword essence that looked like fireworks flew out again, turning into a nebula and rushing towards the primordial water. Everyone who saw it has a share. Wang Jingqiang and the others had covetous looks in their eyes. One of them had a sword essence that looked like a mountain, while the other had a sword essence that looked like a mountain flower. Both of them flew out first, and attacked the ice phoenix celestial body. Fairy Hongxia's ice phoenix celestial body was huge, and it covered the space around her for hundreds of feet. However, her celestial body was not like Xiao Hua's phoenix celestial body. It had the ability to control lightning, and could attack freely. It could only provide some benefits to Fairy Hongxia in terms of controlling her skill. If she released it, it would naturally be a target for the others. She was also indebted to the two third-grade illusory swordsmen for thinking highly of her and attacking her together. Rumble. Two loud sounds rang out, and the ice phoenix celestial body flashed violently under the attack of the two sword essences. Although Fairy Hongxia controlled her celestial body to dodge, and the two illusory swords did not attack too deliberately, she could not help but cry out in pain. More than half of her ice phoenix celestial body was torn apart by the sword essence. And this was very different from the injuries she suffered in the Battle of the Sword Tomb. In the illusory sword essence, each sword essence was an individual flying sword. Fairy Hongxia's ice phoenix celestial body was hit by thousands of flying swords, and every detail of her celestial body was destroyed. It was not something that could be recovered with simple recuperation. Fairy Hongxia could not hold on any longer. She fell onto the flying boat, and the ice phoenix celestial body was absorbed back into her body. Fortunately, although the ice phoenix celestial body was absorbed, the primordial water was still outside the flying boat. Of course, the primordial water was not in a good state. The sword essence from Zhuo Jian had rushed into the primordial water, and it was riddled with holes. It seemed like the primordial water would be destroyed with just a few more sword essences. Sigh, if my dear Xiao was here, the primordial water would not be in such a sorry state. Fairy Hongxia tried her best to control the primordial water, and thought to herself, although the primordial water is powerful, my cultivation is too weak, and I can't unleash the full power of the primordial water. Forget it. Success or failure depends on this battle. With that thought, Fairy Hongxia clenched her teeth, and a stream of water flew out. It was the primordial water from the tidal bead. This primordial water merged with the primordial water from before, and covered the entire flying boat. Ha ha ha, so there is so much primordial water. This old man and the rest will not be left empty-handed. At this moment, the other two illusory swords had also flown close. Seeing that Fairy Hongxia had taken out so much primordial water, they laughed. Since they knew that each of them would get a share of the primordial water, Zhuo Jian and the rest naturally weakened their attacks. But at this moment, a loud roar came from the flying boat, from the primordial water. Shameless scoundrels. 6 illusory swords besieging 3 foundation establishment stage cultivators. Even if you want the primordial water, you have to ask for my immortal slaying whip. Then, from the gap of the primordial water, a row of yellow whip shadows flew out. This row of whip shadows formed 6, and each of them smashed towards the 6 illusory swordsmen. Ha, isn't this Li Zongbao, who was extremely famous in the Taoist sword war? How can the immortal piercing whip of the Utopia faction be a match for me? Wang Jingqiang was a swordsman from the Ling Feng sword sect. Naturally, he knew the situation of the Taoist sword war very well. Seeing the whip shadows approaching him, he laughed and pointed his finger casually. A sword light turned into a mountain peak, blocking the whip shadows. Unexpectedly, the moment the whip shadow came into contact with the mountain peak's sword intent, the whip shadow suddenly twisted like a spirit snake and penetrated the gap between the mountain peak's sword intent. It suddenly penetrated the sword intent and struck directly in front of Wang Jingqiang's eyes. Ouch! Every day, Wang Jingqiang saw the sound of magic weapons colliding with the sword will. When he saw the whip shadows forcibly bypassing the sword will, he was even more surprised. However, at the same time, he shrugged his shoulders casually. The sword light on his body turned into dozens of sword lights, blocking the whip shadows. This time, Wang Jingqiang was naturally careful. He didn't dare to be careless. The whip shadow actually lingered in front of the sword light for a moment, as if it was pondering. Although the yellow light on the whip shadow shone brightly, it suddenly struck towards a certain part of the sword light. Oh, no! Wang Jingqiang did not care about it at first. However, when the whip shadows fell on the sword lights, an unstoppable force was generated, and the sword lights collapsed. Wang Jingqiang turned pale with fright, not only because of the power of the whip shadows, but also because the place where the whip shadows hit was a flaw in the sword lights. When the whip shadows hit that spot, the sword lights were all destroyed. Boom! The sword lights around Wang Jingqiang shone brightly. His figure flashed, but the whip shadows still hit him before they dissipated. Although the whip shadows did not have much power on him, but Wang Jingqiang's face turned red. Not to mention that Li Zongbao was fighting against 6 people. Even if he was fighting against Wang Jingqiang alone, it would be a fierce slap to Wang Jingqiang's face if the whip hit him. Wang Jingqiang was a 3rd-grade illusory swordsman whose cultivation was higher than Li Zongbao's master. There's something wrong with the immortal piercing whip. Instantly, Wang Jingqiang understood that Li Zongbao's cultivation could not have increased so much in such a short time. Looking at Zhuo Jian and the others, the 5 3rd-grade illusory swordsmen were all hit by the whip, and they all looked extremely embarrassed. At the same time, there was a trace of fanaticism in their eyes. However, the whole scene was somewhat stagnant. Even when Xiao Mao urged the flowing cloud airship, which was wrapped in innate primordial water, to escape through the gap between the 6 people, the 6 people did not stop him. It was as if they did not see him at all. Chase! Zhuo Jian's idea was not inferior to Wang Jingqiang's. He saw that everyone was a little afraid of each other. Some of the previous agreements had changed because of the appearance of the innate primordial water and the immortal piercing whip. Moreover, for some reason, no one wanted to be the first to face Li Zongbao. He could only wave his hand and fly up first, chasing after the flowing cloud airship at a speed that was not too fast. Chapter 2786. Yes, Li Zongbao was able to hit each of the 6 illusory swords. If he really used the immortal piercing whip on one of the illusory swords, then, what would happen? If there was only one illusory sword, it would be fine. But now, there were 6 of them. Who could guarantee that the others would not spread the news? If that happened, the one who was hit by the immortal piercing whip would lose a lot of face. Although the illusory swordsmen were criticizing the Taoist sect cultivators for being sanctimonious, when it came to their face, they had to be mindful of it. After all, they were illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen. Seeing Sui Jian flying away, Wang Jingqiang and the rest looked at each other and did not dare to delay. Like before, they fanned out and chased after him. While they were chasing, they were also communicating with each other, as if they were discussing something. Unfortunately, after chasing for half a day, the 6 of them did not increase their speed. Even though the flowing cloud airship did not hide like Xiaohua, they still maintained a certain distance from the airship. After all, the immortal piercing whip was not comparable to the innate primordial water or the divine sword mystic technique. There was only one of it. Whoever made the first move would get it. But who would make the first move? This was a bigger problem than the immortal piercing whip. Furthermore, the flowing cloud flying ship could not escape from their grasp. Even if they chased after Xiaohua like this, they could still fish him out. They could only focus on maintaining the current situation. The flowing cloud airship was covered by the innate primordial water, so the 6 illusory swordsmen could not see the situation on the airship. Among the 3 of them, besides Xiao Mao, Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia were both injured. Not to mention Fairy Hongxia, her phoenix celestial body was destroyed by the 2 illusory swords and her bloodline was severely damaged. Not to mention using her dermic powers to cast spells, it was not easy for her to even sit cross-legged on the airship. Looking at Li Zongbao, he was also sitting there listlessly. His face was pale and his dermic powers were exhausted. Senior brother. Fairy Hongxia tried her best to activate her dermic body and maintain the innate primordial water to defend against the attacks of the illusory swords. She said weakly, "Your immortal slaying whip is not complete yet. Why do you have to use it? If I don't use it today, when will I?" Li Zongbao replied indifferently. "Do you want me to fall before you use it?" Then, he looked at the immortal slaying whip in his hand and smirked, "But this thing is really impressive. With my magic power, I can only use it once. If these illusory swords knew about this, I wonder what they would think. It's a spiritual weapon after all. How can an ordinary magic treasure compare to the amount of magic power it requires?" Xiao Mao also sighed and said, "Moreover, Senior Brother Li is forcefully activating an incomplete spirit artifact. I'm afraid that it will cause some damage to this spirit artifact, right?" Li Zongbao's mind was connected to the spiritual artifact, so he could naturally sense the wild and violent nature of the spiritual artifact that had not been completely nurtured. However, he glanced at Xiao Mao and did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Where are those illusory swords? Why haven't they attacked after such a long time? They are only following outside the flying ship. They did not attack. They did not even close the distance." Fairy Hongxia said in a low voice. "Humph. A bunch of greedy old farts." Li Zongbao understood immediately. He snorted and said, "They must be thinking of a way to take away my immortal slaying whip." Fairy Hongxia was stunned for a moment. Then, she understood and smiled bitterly in her heart. She did not expect that Li Zhongbao's rash use of the immortal slaying whip would cause the 6 illusory swords to be suspicious of each other, resulting in a stalemate. It saved the 3 of them from dying on the spot. This stalemate will not last long. Fairy Hong Xia said in a low voice, let's hold on for as long as we can. Li Zhongbao said calmly, as for our countermeasure, I'm afraid we can only rely on Xiao Mao to activate the flying ship. Sigh, that's true. Fairy Hong Xia had already predicted this trip to Mount Million Mang. However, she did not expect that they would end up like this before they could even reach the border of Mount Million Mang. Therefore, she also understood why no one from the Kai family of Qing Yang had been able to go to Mount Million Mang and find the ancestral shrine of the Kai family. Unknowingly, a few days had passed. Xiao Mao, who had been controlling the flying ship, could not hold on any longer. On the other hand, Fairy Hong Xia and Li Zhongbao's injuries had recovered somewhat. This was because with the protection of the innate primordial water, Fairy Hong Xia's empty fort strategy had not changed. Zhuge Jian and the rest had seen through it. However, Zhuge Jian and the rest were patient. The 6 of them discussed for a while and had come to a temporary conclusion. Xiang Mufeng of the Drifting Cloud Sword Manor activated his sword radiance and caught up with the flying ship. With a wave of his hand, a cloud-like sword will rushed out and entered the innate primordial water. With a loud bang, a series of ripples appeared on the innate primordial water that was flowing peacefully. Then, a crack appeared on the primordial water, and a yellow shadow of a whip flew out. Xiang Mufeng's face lit up with joy. The sword radiance around him shone brightly. Thousands of small swords shimmering in white light surrounded him like wisps of smoke. With a muffled sound, the shadow of the immortal slaying whip landed on the sword shadow. It was very faint and did not make any special sound. Oh! Xiang Mufeng was a little stunned. He thought to himself, could it be, just as Zhuge Jian said, that the Dharma power consumed by this magic treasure is not something that a foundation-building cultivator can support? Is Li Zhongbao only strong on the outside but weak on the inside? However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, there was a loud roar that sounded like the roar of a dragon or a tiger. The shadow of the whip that landed on the sword radiance suddenly seemed to have come to life. The shadow of the whip suddenly expanded and even twisted like a yellow python and plunged into the shadow of the sword. The head of the shadow of the whip directly hit Xiang Mufeng's sword armor. The tail of the shadow of the whip even smashed the shadow of the sword into pieces. Oh no! When Xiang Mufeng saw that the shadow of the whip was close to him, he did not dare to hesitate anymore. The sword origin in his body quickly flowed out. His entire body gradually became transparent, and a giant sword appeared. Boom! As soon as the giant sword appeared, the shadow of the immortal slaying whip hit the giant sword. The sword radiance on the giant sword flickered slightly, and the shadow of the whip was smashed into pieces and fell into the air. Buzz! The giant sword made a slight sound, and Xiang Mufeng slowly returned to his human form. However, there was a hint of seriousness on his face. He was not as happy as he was when he blocked the immortal slaying whip. Fellow swordsman Xiang, how is it? The power of this immortal slaying whip. Zhuge Jian flew over from behind and asked loudly. That's right. It is indeed a supreme-grade magic treasure. Xiang Mufeng nodded and said, it even has the meaning of a legendary spiritual artifact. The shadow of the immortal slaying whip can actually identify the flaws in my sword will. If this magic treasure does not have a spirit, then Li Zhongbao would be able to see through it. This Li Zhongbao is also quite a character. Zhuge Jian said calmly as he raised his head and looked at the flying ship that was escaping in a panic. That's right. After all, the 3 of them were heroes in the Great War of Tao and Sword. If they did not have some tricks up their sleeves, how would they dare to come to my sword realm to train? Wang Jingqiang said coldly. Moreover, that terrifying phoenix, which is even more powerful, actually colluded with the three of them to attack my sword realm illusory sword. If we don't kill them here, where will our dignity go? But it's been so many days, and that terrifying phoenix still hasn't shown up. Pu Qingfeng of the Flat Mountain Sword School also said somewhat anxiously, junior brother Sikong Yu of my humble sect died at his hands. If I don't kill Xiaohua, I'm afraid I won't have the face to return to the mountains and become a senior of the Flat Mountain Sword School. Since things have come to this, there's no need for us to say anything more. Zhou Zhou of the Thousand Leaves Sword Sect gritted his teeth and said, let's just kill him. As for who will take the immortal slaying whip, it won't be too late to decide after Li Zongbao dies. Looks like that's the only way. Cui Jian smiled bitterly. The six of them had discussed this matter many times, but no one was satisfied with the result. If other sword friends come, it'll be even harder to deal with them. We'll do as you say, sword friend Zhua. Huang Ping of the Lunar Sun Sword Sect raised her eyes and looked at the towering and dangerous peak several dozen li away from the flying boat. She said, this sword will head to the sword peak and intercept the flying boat from the front. Let's settle this matter there. Good, we'll do as you say, sword friend Huang. Cui Jian looked at everyone. Wang Jingqiang and the others nodded, so he clapped his hands and said, as for who the immortal slaying whip belongs to, we can discuss it after these three die. Since everyone had come to an agreement, they all stepped on their flying swords and flew towards the flowing cloud flying ship, not showing any mercy. It seemed like they wanted to kill the three of them here. Not to mention that Fairy Hongxia had already fallen into a dangerous situation and was about to be killed by 6 grade 3 illusory swordsmen on the sword arrowhead peak. The lost Xiaohua was like a headless fly, flying in all directions, trying to find a sword cultivator to ask for directions. However, after flying for a long time, Xiaohua did not notice that the scenery around him had already changed. The ice field that was everywhere had gradually become less and more ripples appeared. The icebergs above the ripples had also become much smaller. Although there was no green vegetation, gray nameless thorns appeared in his field of vision. Although there were not many of these thorns, they still changed the pure white color of the ice field. Damn it, can someone come out? Xiaohua scratched his ears and cheeks, constantly releasing his divine sense to search. At the same time, he thought anxiously, hasn't my luck always been excellent? Today. But just as this thought appeared in his mind, he was dumbfounded. He could not help but be dumbfounded. About 100 kilometers in front of him, he scanned with his divine sense and saw a swordsman. However, it was not just one swordsman, but many. So many that when Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense, he could not see how many there were. Are these sword cultivators here to kill me? This was the first thought that came to Xiaohua's mind. However, when Xiaohua switched to using his Buddhist sense and secretly peeked, he found that these swordsmen had their backs facing him. Moreover, there was a faint fluctuation of sword light in front of the swordsmen, like a sword array. It seemed like they were hiding their tracks. There was no sign of them chasing after him. Chapter 2787. Moreover, most of these swordsmen were disciples of the Drawing Sword sect. Only a small portion of them were disciples of the first or second grade of the Illusory Sword sect. How could they be here to kill him? This is strange. What are these swordsmen doing? Since I have to find someone to ask, I might as well go and take a look. Xiaohua thought. His eyes turned, and he withdrew the Imperial Thunder Transformation's Lightning Escape technique. He quietly changed it to Wind Escape technique, and used the Devil Realm's Concealment technique to stealthily approach those ambushing sword cultivators. However, before he could get close to those swordsmen, he saw that the swordsmen's bodies suddenly flashed with sword light. They all flew out from their hiding places and flew up into the sky like a swarm of locusts. Damn it, I'm afraid, there are tens of thousands of people. Xiao Hua was somewhat dumbstruck. They are fighting against my Dao sect cultivators? My Dao sect cultivators, when did they advance to this place? When Xiao Hua sensed the scene, he unconsciously stood in the air. His eyes stared straight ahead, and he muttered, "My goodness, why are there so many people? Who should I ask for directions?" Of course, right in front of Xiao Hua, there was a large plain. Although the plain was covered in snow, it was already different from the rest of Huan country. The snow was not frozen solid. Instead, it was similar to the snow that Xiao Hua had seen before. It was somewhat like cotton wool, fluffy and piled up on the ground. When one stepped on it, mud and snow would definitely splash up. It was no longer the solid ice of Huan country. Looking at the snowy plain again, there were actually two groups of people preparing to fight to the death. The ones closest to Xiao Hua, needless to say, were the tens of thousands of swordsmen who were lying in ambush just now. However, the ones confronting these tens of thousands of swordsmen were not the Dao sect cultivators that Xiao Hua had imagined. Instead, it was a group of people who not only dressed strangely, but also had a somewhat different appearance. These people who made Xiao Hua dumbfounded, there were probably tens of thousands of them. These people were all dark, thin, and short. Every one of them had strange patterns engraved on their bodies. Some of these patterns were like beasts, some were like birds, and some were like ferocious ghost faces and white ghastly holes. Looking at the attire of these people, it could be said that there were all kinds of strange things. Some only used some leaves to wrap around their waists, some used vines to wrap around their necks, and some even used something that looked like leaves to wrap around their heads. In short, none of them were wearing proper clothes, and none of them were wearing a complete robe. Looking at the hands of these people, they didn't have any flying swords, nor did they have any artifacts or treasures that Xiao Hua was familiar with. However, they weren't empty-handed either. Some of them were holding long white bones that had been polished until they were shiny and sharp. Some of them were holding several human skulls that were strung together. Each skull was painted with a strange color. There were even some people who were holding pieces of wood that had been carved. Some looked like snakes, while others looked like toads. These dark, thin people holding strange weapons were not standing on the ground, nor were they floating in the air. Instead, they were riding on the backs of strange spirit beasts. These spirit beasts were of different sizes. The small ones were about half a zhang in size, with jagged bones and flesh, and the big ones were several zhang in size, with huge bodies. However, no matter the size of the spirit beasts, each and every one of them was abnormally fierce. Each and every one of them roared with all their strength in place. If not for the restraints of the masters on their backs, they would have already rushed out. At this time, the sword cultivator had already flown into the air. With a flash of sword light, he had already launched an attack. But these dark, thin people did not seem to care at all, coldly watching. When they were about 100 zhang away from them, a strange sound came from somewhere among them. This sound was like the cry of cicadas, but also like the hiss of beasts, piercing straight into the horizon. Boom! Boom! As soon as the sound was heard, all the spirit beasts began to run. The loud noise immediately drowned out the sound of the command. The entire ground began to shake. The snow and mud mixed together and splashed high into the air. Wah wah wah! A similarly strange sound came from the mouths of the people on the spirit beasts. This sound had a strange rhythm. These people, are they stupid? Xiao Hua stood blankly in the air, still muttering in a low voice, as if he had not woken up from the shock just now. They don't have any magic tools or flying swords, How can they fight against the sword cultivators who are attacking that side? But obviously, these dark, thin people were not idiots. Even the several tens of thousands of sword cultivators were somewhat afraid of these strange people riding on the backs of spirit beasts. The swordsmen did not want to form a sword formation like the cultivators, but rather arranged themselves in a neat formation, attacking from three sides. Not a single swordsman stepped out of the formation. Buzz buzz, the flying swords of the several tens of thousands of swordsmen could not be underestimated. The sword lights were almost connected into one, like the rising tide of the sea, slowly and courageously rushing toward the tide of spirit beasts. Whoa 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 whoa. Way whoa whoa. A strange sound with an obscure rhythm rang out. In the tide of spirit beasts, the several tens of thousands of dark, thin people opened their mouths at the same time. This sound was noisy at first, like the buzzing of bees, but then it gradually echoed, as if the same person was singing. Finally, just before the swordsmen came into contact with them, layers of faint green brilliance emerged from the tide of spirit beasts. Soul cultivators. These are soul cultivators. Seeing this scene, how could Xiao Hua, who practiced soul cultivation techniques, not see it? These several tens of thousands of dark, thin people were none other than the mysterious soul cultivators of Meng Mountain. Why did they run into the Han country, to fight against sword cultivators? Although Xiao Hua had made countless guesses about the appearance of soul cultivators, and even imagined many scenarios of meeting soul cultivators, he did not expect this kind of soul cultivator to be like this. How could he ever have guessed that soul cultivators would be like this? Furthermore, he had encountered soul cultivators much earlier than he had expected. While Xiao Hua was still in shock, the beast tide of soul cultivators had already collided with the sword cultivators. The faint green brilliance caused by the chanting of soul cultivators grew thicker and thicker. Like strands of tentacles, it penetrated deep into the sword formation of the sword cultivators. When the sword cultivators touched the faint green brilliance, the sword lights on their bodies were annihilated, and they fell from the sky with their eyes closed. When their corpses fell to the ground, many of them were trampled by the spirit beasts of soul cultivators. Some of them had their bones and flesh broken, and some of them had their blood splattered everywhere. For a moment, they were mixed with the snow and mud. Looking again, many of the swordsmen's sword lights had also pierced into the faint green brilliance, and the sword lights around these swordsmen had also blocked the corrosion of the faint green brilliance. All of the sword lights were aimed precisely at the soul cultivator's forehead, right in between his eyebrows. But as soon as the sword lights got close to the soul cultivator, a roar could be heard coming from the spirit beasts beneath the soul cultivator. From their mouths, noses, and feet, different colored lights could be seen shooting out from their mouths, noses, and feet to block the sword lights with a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. Just like that, the incomparably sharp flying sword of the soul cultivator was blocked by the spirit beasts. While chanting, the soul cultivator swung the sword in his hand. A strange wave of energy came out from the soul armament to attack the sword cultivator. Bzz, some of the swordsmen were able to defend against the soul cultivator's attack, while others were unable to defend against the soul cultivator's attack. Some of the swordsmen were forced to retreat, while others fell from the sky as if they had lost consciousness. Of course, there were also powerful sword cultivators who managed to break through the soul cultivator's defense. Their sword lights were like lightning, and their sword lights were like rainbows as they pierced through the soul cultivator's forehead and killed him on top of his spirit beast. But strangely enough, the spirit beasts didn't break free from the soul cultivator's control because of the soul cultivator's death. Instead, they let out mournful howls, withered to the ground, and slowly lost their life force. Then, they launched their final attack and died under the sword cultivator's sword. Not a single one of them survived. The entire battlefield was filled with the sounds of battle, and the chanting of the soul cultivator grew louder and louder. Even though Xiao Hua was hidden in the distance, his forehead was still slightly swollen and trembling. It was even a little hot. So this is how soul cultivators fight. Xiao Hua was afraid of being discovered by the soul cultivators and sword cultivators, so he didn't dare to release his divine will and Buddhist awareness. Instead, he used the demon realm's concealment technique to hide in midair. As he observed carefully, he couldn't help but think to himself, this soul cultivator's technique is really mysterious. Even though this young master has cultivated the art of soul cultivation to the level of pure spirit heaven, I'm still confused. I don't know if this soul cultivator is using soul threads, or just relying on soul items. However, from now on, this young master somewhat understood that the physique of a soul cultivator is not as strong as that of a sword cultivator, and they don't have as many offensive techniques as the cultivators of my Dao sect. They also need to rely on the strength of spirit beasts to defend themselves. In fact, the life and death of these spirit beasts are tied together with the life and death of the soul cultivator. But why don't these swordsmen form a powerful sword formation? Aren't the yin-yang sword formation and the 5-element splitting-edge sword formation extremely powerful? Also, these sword cultivators, aren't they too ostentatious? The battle between them and my Dao sect hasn't ended yet, and they've provoked the soul cultivators here. How many swordsmen do they have in Huan Kingdom? Can they resist the pincer attack of the Dao sect and millions of Meng mountains? While Xiao Hua was lost in thought, the battle raged on. Swordsmen fell one after another, and the dark and skinny soul cultivators fell as well. Sword cultivators and soul cultivators were tangled up in a melee, and corpses were being tossed to the ground one after another. However, the dark green aura didn't decline. Instead, as the number of vengeful souls increased, it became even redder. Of course, the sword cultivators who could fight until now all had some tricks up their sleeves. Chapter 2788. Behind the soul cultivator, there was a dense swarm of spirit fowl flying through the air. These spirit fowl were vastly different from the spirit fowl of the Dao school. Not only were their feathers not as bright and colorful, their bodies weren't as light either. The spirit fowl in front was roughly 30 meters long. The 80-meter-long body was as thick as a mountain and covered in dense patterns. Some of the patterns looked like eyes, some looked like skeletons, and there were even some that looked like corpses dripping with blood. The front of the spirit fowl had a small head that was flat and a tail that was about 20 meters long. The wings on the back of the spirit fowl were several meters long and shone with a grayish-black light. On top of the spirit fowl was a skinny soul warrior. He wore simple black armor and held a trident in his hand that was about a meter long. The soul warrior's eyes shone brightly. Even though the armor covered his face, Xiao Hua could still see the sharpness in his eyes. Behind the soul warrior were 100 or so other soul warriors. Their spirit fowl couldn't compare to the spirit fowl of the soul warrior in front, but they were still several meters long and had different patterns on them. Outside of the soul warrior's armor, his bare skin was covered in strange black and white patterns, just like the previous soul warriors. Behind them were several tens of thousands of soul warriors. They weren't wearing any armor. Aside from the spirit fowl they rode, they were all similar to the soul warriors fighting on the ground. That ear-piercing shriek came from the spirit bird at the front. The spirit bird's sharp gaze swept across the battlefield, and it let out a few goo-goo sounds. In an instant, the entire group of spirit birds became noisy. They did not even need the leader at the front to give the order, and they all swooped down. Whiz, whiz. The sword cultivators on the ground were terrified by the approach of the soul cultivators. Their swords let out a mournful wail as they flew up into the air, circled around in midair, and then charged in the opposite direction of the soul cultivators, disregarding everything else. As for the soul cultivator's spirit beasts, they were enormous in size, but also incredibly fast. Hundreds of spirit beasts led the charge, causing the air to tremble as they flew across the battlefield in pursuit of the soul cultivators. More and more swordsmen fell to the soul warriors' soul armaments and spirit beasts. The entire army of swordsmen was completely defeated, and the remaining tens of thousands of swordsmen fled in panic. All the soul warriors, regardless of whether they were on the ground or in the air, had to chase after them. Woo woo woo, an extremely cheerful cry came out from the spirit warrior's mouth. All of the soul cultivators stopped what they were doing, and all of the soul warriors began to cheer. Then, all of the soul warriors landed on the ground and began to dance. It was almost as if they were celebrating. Xiaohua was very familiar with the way they danced. Wasn't it similar to the way the primordial spirit danced in the mysterious dark clouds? As for those spirit beasts, they were either dancing on the ground or dancing in the air. All of them were familiar with each other, and all of them cooperated harmoniously. Motherfucker, this is possible. Xiaohua watched in disbelief as the limbs of these spirit warriors began to perform unimaginable movements. As the spirit warriors danced, their previously pale faces and even their shriveled bodies regained their vigor and vitality. Their bodies were also somewhat plump. I understand now. Xiaohua suddenly realized. These soul cultivators need to use soul techniques in battle, and these soul warriors must have damaged their bodies. These soul cultivators are actually using the primordial spirit cultivation method on their bodies. This is a way to make up for the injuries they've suffered before. As expected, the green light that filled the battlefield had already dimmed. It seemed to have been absorbed by the soul cultivators and spirit beasts. The soul warriors rejoiced for at least an hour. Then, they cheered as they rushed into the mud and blood. They lifted up the bodies of the sword cultivators and swiftly cut off the heads. Then, they took the vines from their waists and strapped them to their chests. As for the bodies and storage bags, they placed them on the backs of the spirit beasts. For a moment, blood flowed out and dripped onto the bodies of the soul cultivators and spirit beasts. However, they simply turned a blind eye to it. Looking at their skillful selection and searching everywhere, Xiaohua understood that these bodies were killed by the soul cultivators themselves. When everyone found the bodies of the swordsmen they had killed, they quietly looked at the soul cultivator in front of them. When the soul cultivator made a strange sound and raised his hand, everyone became even more frenzied. They were no longer as orderly as before. Instead, they began to snatch the bodies of the swordsmen. This time, not only were they snatching the bodies of the swordsmen, but they were also snatching the bodies of the soul cultivators and spirit beasts that had fallen. Alas, uncivilized people! A land of barbarians, Xiaohua shook his head and sighed. No wonder the cultivators of my Dao sect, and even the swordsmen, don't put these millions of soul cultivators in their eyes. After the time it took to eat a meal, they saw that there was nothing but broken limbs, mud, and blood on the battlefield. Only then did all the soul cultivators regroup and slowly return to where they came from. Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to show himself. Instead, he waited for the time it took to brew a cup of tea before he used the Devil World's concealment technique to fly towards the battlefield. He had just flown to a place a few dozen meters away from the battlefield when the smell of blood that soared to the sky filled his mouth and nose. Within this smell of blood that didn't disperse for a long time, there was even an incomparably vicious aura. Although Xiaohua didn't release the Buddha Sarira, he could still deeply feel the anguished wails of the fallen souls on the battlefield. Alas, Xiaohua sighed. Just as he was about to reveal himself and release the Buddha Sarira, he suddenly frowned and a look of astonishment appeared on his face. Not far from where he was, he saw a woman with a slim figure flying toward him on a cloud. If he saw this woman anywhere else, Xiaohua might not have paid attention to her. But this place had just experienced a great battle between sword cultivators and soul cultivators, and the smell of blood had yet to dissipate. How could he not be astonished when this woman appeared? However, when the woman flew closer, Xiaohua unconsciously became a little absent-minded. The woman was in her early teens. Her delicate face was rosy and cute, and her eyes were as thin as the moon. Her two faint eyebrows hung above the crescent moon like a wisp of smoke. Coupled with her light red lips and small upturned nose, she was as elegant as an ink painting. Coupled with her two little braids, she was even prettier than the girls who walked out of the New Year's painting. If the woman's appearance was like this, then there was no need to talk about her figure. Her waist was as thin as a willow branch, and her upper body was dressed in a thin green robe. The slight bulge in front of her chest was a clear indication of her youthful beauty. As for the woman's lower body, she was dressed in a red dress. Under the dress, her snow-white calves were straight and delicate, and her bare ankles and feet were round and delicate. This woman was actually so alluring. Although she was still young, and there was still some immaturity between her eyebrows, in Xiaohua's eyes, his heart couldn't help but be stirred. See, this woman is a little strange. Xiaohua was absent-minded for a moment, then he immediately sucked in a breath of cold air and hurriedly shifted his gaze away from the woman's body. However, the woman's slim figure and white feet were still swaying in front of his eyes. It's still a little strange. Xiaohua regained his senses and suddenly came to a realization. After looking at her for a while, I only felt that this woman's eyes were full of spirit. But I actually didn't look carefully at her eyes. Sure enough, when Xiaohua carefully looked at the woman's eyes again, those moon-like eyes were really like smoke. The eyes in her eyes seemed to be there but not there. For a moment it was an ordinary pitch-black color, and for a moment, it was like a misty deep pool, and as Xiaohua focused his gaze seemed to be about to sink into the woman's eyes. See, Xiaohua's mind was slightly blurred, and God's guidance operated vigilantly. Xiaohua immediately came to his senses and hurriedly retracted his gaze, then sucked in a breath of cold air again. Strange. Where did this woman come from? Xiaohua secretly shouted, his heart was filled with doubts. This woman didn't realize that she was being spied on by Xiaohua, and while jumping, she flew onto the battlefield. When she saw the cruelty of the battlefield, the woman's brows slightly wrinkled. She hesitated for a moment in midair, then she actually descended a bit, slowly flying on the battlefield. As she flew, her lips slightly moved, and her gaze scanned the surroundings, as if she was looking for something. About the time it took to smoke a cigarette, the woman roughly looked over the battlefield once, then flew up again with some disappointment, looking around. It should be here. I can't be wrong. But there's nothing here. The woman's voice was like a silver bell, and even more so like a clear spring gurgling out of a mountain rock, cool and refreshing to the ear. What is this girl looking for? Xiaohua couldn't help but feel anxious for her, wishing that he could help her find it. Come out. I can see you. The woman shouted towards a certain place, as if she was playing hide-and-seek with someone else. Xiaohua hid there, and couldn't help but smile. He had always been here, but he had never seen anyone else hiding there. How could he not know that this was the woman's bluff? If it was somewhere else, Xiaohua might have flown out and said a few words to this woman. But this place was Huan country, and a great battle had just happened. This woman suddenly appeared, although she didn't have an inch of armor, and he couldn't see any special cultivation. Who knew what this woman's background was? Of course, Xiaohua was almost certain that this woman was definitely not a sword cultivator, nor was she a cultivator of the Dao sect, but was she a soul cultivator? Thinking about that ugly and barbaric soul cultivator just now, Xiaohua himself denied it. Were soul cultivators such beautiful people?
Chapter 2789. How could this girl, who was still a budding flower but was already so attractive, be an unenlightened person like Wan Shan in Meng Mountain? But this girl wasn't a swordsman, nor was she a cultivator or a soul warrior. Who could she be? If she was an ordinary woman, no one would believe that she would be able to wear thin clothes in the cold weather of the Huan Kingdom, not to mention that she would be able to come here on a cloud. Since he couldn't see her cultivation level, then, it could be said that she was unfathomable. Even though Xiaohua didn't have any warning signs and didn't feel that this girl was a threat to him, he still didn't want to show himself. If worst comes to worst, I'll let her search here for half a day. If she doesn't see anyone, won't she leave? Although Xiaohua was somewhat anxious, he didn't dare to act rashly. He was really afraid that if he moved, he would be discovered by this strange girl. Unexpectedly, the girl circled around to the left and unexpectedly landed. She calmly sat down on a pile of snow and casually grabbed a clump of snow in her hand. Using a bit of strength, she squeezed it into a snowball. Looking left and right, she swung her arm and threw it out. Paw paw. It smashed into some gray vegetation on the snow. Immediately, the girl used her hands to support her cheek and lowered her head to look at the snow and mud. She seemed somewhat absent-minded. Seeing that the girl had actually sat there for half a day, Xiaohua somewhat couldn't bear it. He had no reason to accompany this girl who seemed to be playing here and wasting time for no reason. Since he couldn't ask for directions here, he might as well go somewhere else to look. Thinking, Xiaohua slightly moved and was about to use a concealment technique to leave. But just as he moved, the girl raised her head and looked at Xiaohua's location. She playfully said, "I see you, quickly come out." The girl raised her face and smiled like a flower. It was a kind of smile that came from the heart. "I've been waiting for you for so long, you actually didn't come out to see me? Are you willing to let me wait for you in this world of ice and snow?" Xiaohua sighed, knowing that he was still discovered by this girl. His figure flashed in midair, and he touched his nose and said with a bitter smile, "Little girl, the person you're looking for isn't here. I've already stopped here for half a day. Besides the soul cultivator and swordsman who were fighting just now, no one else has come. If you want to find someone, you should go somewhere else." "How did you know that I was looking for someone else?" The girl stood up, tilted her head and looked at Xiaohua. She smiled and said, "Why am I not looking for you?" "You. Are you looking for me?" Xiaohua was greatly surprised. "You and I have never met before. Why are you looking for me?" "Don't ask me why I'm looking for you." The girl chuckled. "Let me ask you first, are you looking for someone?" That's right. How do you know I'm looking for someone?" Xiaohua asked curiously. "But aren't you looking for someone too?" Don't ask me how I know you're looking for someone. I only know that I know you're looking for someone, just like how I know I'm looking for you. Moreover, I can only find you here." Although these words were extremely difficult to pronounce, this girl's words were very catchy and pleasant to listen to. "Well, since you know I'm looking for someone, then tell me where the person I'm looking for is." Xiaohua said helplessly, "Then, tell me why you're looking for me." The girl tilted her head slightly and said with a smile, "My name is Jiu Xia, what's your name?" "My name is Xiaohua." Xiaohua did not hide anything and replied. "Xiaohua? Strange. Why are you called Xiaohua?" Hearing Xiaohua's name, Jiu Xia was a little surprised.
After thinking for a moment, she asked, "Other than Xiaohua, do you have any other names?" "Oh." Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat, and asked curiously, "What do you think my name should be?" Looks like you're really called Xiaohua." Jiu Xia giggled and said, "But why did you, a Dao Sex Jindan stage cultivator, run to the sword domain? At this time, isn't the battle between the Dao sect and the sword cultivators going on in the Sky Patrol City? Aren't I looking for someone?" Xiaohua also smiled slightly. "Nothing is more important than looking for someone. Don't you think so?" Right, looking for someone is the most important thing. Jiu Xia said with a smile. Although I am Xiaohua and don't have any other names, but... Can you tell me where the person I'm looking for is? Xiaohua asked. Unfortunately, Jiu Xia shook her head slightly. Where is the person you're looking for? I don't know. But, I know where you should go. Where to? Xiaohua asked. Sword Peak. Jiu Xia replied without hesitation. Oh. Sword Peak. Where is that? Xiaohua was slightly stunned, and asked, is it near the Flowing Cloud Lake? Flowing Cloud Lake. Jiu Xia thought for a moment, then shook her head. The Flowing Cloud Lake is a place at the border between the Million Meng Mountains and the Sword Domain, but the Sword Peak is within the Sword Domain, and the two are in different directions. In which direction is the Flowing Cloud Lake? Xiaohua asked. Unfortunately, at this point, Jiu Xia did not answer, and instead asked, don't you want to know why I'm looking for you? Yes. Xiaohua answered without hesitation, but I want to know where the Flowing Cloud Lake is even more. Actually, I want to ask you for a favor. Jiu Xia hesitated slightly, however, I know that if I say it now, you will definitely refuse, so I can't tell you right now. Strange, you didn't say that I know if I can help you. If you want me to help you, you must tell me first. Xiaohua was even more puzzled. But Jiu Xia still shook her head. You don't have to ask this, I naturally know that you will refuse once I say it. Forget it, tell me where the Flowing Cloud Lake is. Xiaohua said helplessly. You don't have to go to the Flowing Cloud Lake, you can go directly to the Sword Peak. Jiu Xia did not tell Xiaohua the location of the Flowing Cloud Lake. Why should I listen to you? Xiaohua looked up and down at Jiu Xia. If you don't tell me the direction of the Flowing Cloud Lake, I can go to other places to ask. This is the battlefield of sword cultivators and soul cultivators. Jiu Xia said with a smile, I'm afraid you can't understand the words of soul cultivators. And sword cultivators are all in groups. You, a cultivator of the Dao sect, want to ask for directions. I'm afraid it won't be easy, right? Don't worry about that. Xiaohua snorted coldly. And, you should have a way to ask. Jiu Xia was not angry, and said indifferently, but, if you go to the Flowing Cloud Lake, then your beloved will lose her life. Only if you go to the Sword Peak and bring me along will your beloved be able to live. You. Do you believe it? You. Are you willing to bet? Why would I bet with you for no reason? Xiaohua was happy, since you know everything, what else do you want to bet with me? Jiu Xia smiled slightly, with a face full of pride, and said, actually, I only know that I can find someone here, he can help me a lot. And I also know where to go next. As for the rest, it's all my own guesses. Ah. You guessed it yourself. Xiaohua was stunned, you said it so well, I thought you knew. But how did you know? Without waiting for Xiaohua to finish speaking, Jiu Xia interrupted him and said, you, a cultivator of the Dao sect, actually took the risk of a great sword battle to accompany this person to the sword domain, and even went so deep. I'm afraid everyone knows about the dangers involved, right? Tell me, if it was just a normal friendship, would you take such a huge risk? This. Xiaohua laughed bitterly again, and couldn't help but rub his nose again. He was somewhat at a loss for words, and his previous abnormal vigilance had also relaxed a little. Although the true essence around his body was circulating from time to time, guarding against Jiu Xia's sneak attack at any time, Xiaohua really believed that she didn't have any ill intentions. You don't have to let your guard down like this. It's better to circulate the true essence protecting your body. Jiu Xia said mischievously. Who knows if I have any ulterior motives towards you? Xiao Hua's mind moved, and his true essence slightly slackened. Jiu Xia sensed it, and said with a sharp mind. You. Xiao Hua was helpless. This Jiu Xia was indeed very sensitive, as if she knew the spiritual qi of heaven and earth and even the movements of other people like the back of her hand. However, this sensitivity, when compared to her exquisite heart aperture, was extremely inferior. It was as if she could completely guess his thoughts with just a single sentence. However, don't worry, I still need to ask you for help, so how could I attack you? Jiu Xia said again, moreover, I can't see through your cultivation. If you want to escape, I definitely won't be able to catch up to you. Xiao Hua saw that Jiu Xia was so confident, and just as he was about to say something, she didn't give him the time or opportunity to do so, and continued, moreover, when you saw me, you were only slightly absent-minded, and your mind wasn't lost at all. Either you practiced a secret technique, or you have a beloved Tao companion in your heart. For a young cultivator like you with a profound cultivation, the female cultivators chasing after you are like moths to a flame. Xiao Hua opened his mouth again. Sure. Jiu Xia stretched out her index finger and placed it on her lips. This action caused Xiao Hua's heart to jump, and he couldn't help but stop talking, as if he was afraid of destroying the beauty within. Wait for me to finish speaking. That kind of coquettishness was very natural, but it was also extremely seductive and infectious. Xiao Hua looked at her in a daze, and didn't say anything else. Jiu Xia was very satisfied, and said again, rather than believe that you practiced a secret technique, it's better to believe that you already have a beloved Tao companion in your heart. Moreover, you wanted to ask me for directions as soon as we met, so naturally, you're burning with impatience to find her. If it wasn't for your beloved, would you prepare to leave this place in such a hurry? You don't even want to say a few more words to me. Ordinary people have an old saying, as long as there are 3 reasons to do something, then it should be done. I can find so many reasons for this matter, so do you think I'm still not sure? Chapter 2790. You are really too smart. Xiao Hua helplessly nodded his head. He shifted his gaze away from Jiu Xia's beautiful face, which was inferior to her intelligence. He muttered, although what you said is not correct, but your guess is correct. Where did I guess wrong? Jiu Xia asked in disbelief. No need. You don't know everything. Being able to guess the result is already very good. Xiao Hua was powerless to argue with her. He waved his hand and said, since you already know that I am going to find my lover, then quickly tell me what I can help you with so that I can go to Flowing Cloud Lake. Jiu Xia shook her head and said, you are wrong. Didn't I just say it? If I say it now, you definitely won't help me. Why should I say it? Secondly, you definitely can't go to Flowing Cloud Lake. You are going to Sword Edge Peak. Moreover, when you go to Sword Edge Peak, you should also bring me along. Bring you along? Xiao Hua was really puzzled. He looked at the exceptionally intelligent and mysterious Jiu Xia and said, I don't even know who you are, let alone where you came from. Why should I bring you along? My name is Jiu Xia. Didn't I just say it? Jiu Xia mischievously said, as for where I come from, is that important? Moreover, I am only following you to see what you can help me with. When I am able to ask you for help, I will ask you for help. So, you still don't know what you need my help with? Xiao Hua suddenly realized. Yes. Jiu Xia slyly replied. I didn't promise to help you. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand. What a joke. Even this mysterious Zhou Xia couldn't do it. How could he do it? He definitely couldn't agree to such a difficult task. You will definitely agree. Zhou Xia confidently replied. Impossible. Xiao Hua shook his head like a rattledrum. Unexpectedly, Zhou Xia didn't argue with him like before. Instead, she smiled and said, "It's okay. If you are not willing to help when I ask you for help, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Just pretend that you've never seen me alone." Xiao Hua had always been amenable to coaxing but not coercion. Hearing this girl's pitiful words, he hesitated and wanted to say something. Zhou Xia flew up first and said, "Let's go. Just now, we could dawdle for a while to dispel your suspicions. But now, we have to go. If you don't go now, your lover will be in trouble." "You're going too?" Xiao Hua helplessly asked. "You just need to point in the direction of Flowing Cloud Lake." "Not only me, but the place we're going to isn't Flowing Cloud Lake either." Zhou Xia corrected him again, but this time, he spat out, "The Sword Edge Peak is a part of the Sword Domain, and it only takes a few days to reach there. The Flowing Cloud Lake is far, and you won't be able to reach there in less than 10 days. Could it be that you want to give up what's close at hand and seek what's far away?" "All right." Hearing that the Sword Edge Peak wasn't far, Xiao Hua agreed. If he didn't meet Fairy Hongxia and the others at the Sword Edge Peak, he could still speed up and reach the Flowing Cloud Lake. Looking at Zhou Xia's mysterious appearance, if Fairy Hongxia really went to the Sword Edge Peak because of some accident and he didn't go to rescue her, wouldn't he regret it for the rest of his life? However, seeing that Zhou Xia didn't turn back, it was as if she already knew that he had to go with her. Forget it. Xiao Hua didn't have any countermeasures to deal with this seemingly harmless girl. He sighed and followed her. "Oh. You. Is this the lightning evasion technique? It's actually so powerful." Seeing Xiao Hua using the lightning evasion technique to chase after her, Zhou Xia was somewhat astonished. I am a disciple of the Imperial Lightning Sect in the country of Xi. Naturally, I know the lightning evasion technique." This wasn't considered a secret, so Xiao Hua didn't hesitate to answer. However, looking at Zhou Xia happily jumping and flying in front of him, and then looking at her graceful waist and smooth lines, cough cough, it seems like it's not bad. Another 2 days passed, and a perfectly straight mountain peak appeared in front of him. It was like a treasured sword piercing into the sky from the ground. Xiao Hua understood that this should be the Sword Edge Peak. The miraculous creation of heaven and earth is nothing more than this. The 3 peaks of Taiqing Sect, Tianzhu Peak of Lian Country, and the Sword Edge Peak of Huan Country are all similar. They are all so majestic. When Xiao Hua saw the Sword Edge Peak, he couldn't help but sigh with emotion as he recalled his encounter at Tianzhu Peak. Legend has it that the Sword Edge Peak of the Sword Domain was left behind by a sword god. At that time, a devil god from the upper realm escaped to the Sword Domain for some unknown reason. He ate swordsmen alive and wanted to turn the Sword Domain into a devil world. This sword god fought with the demonic god of the lower realm for dozens of days before finally defeating and killing the demonic god. However, the sword god himself died from heavy injuries. This Sword Edge Peak is formed from the divine sword in his hand. Zhou Xia explained with a smile as he flew ahead without turning his head. It seemed like the 3 of them knew that they were in danger and would not be able to escape. Xiao Hua was thousands of miles away. Even if he wanted to rescue them, he would not be able to make it in time. "Where did you tell Xiao Hua to meet up?" Li Zongbao closed his eyes and asked softly. Drifting Cloud Lake. Fairy Hongxia answered without hesitation, that is the entrance to Million Mang Mountains from Huan Country. It is also a slightly safer passage to Million Mang Mountains. What a pity. Li Zongbao sighed. Xiao Hua is the best at getting lost. If he could get lost from Drifting Cloud Lake to here, that would be great. He is a directionally challenged idiot. Fairy Hongxia said with a smile, unable to hide her love for Xiao Hua. Li. Senior brother Li. Xiao Mao could not help but stutter. Senior sister, you guys listen. Fairy Hongxia and Li Zongbao were both injured. How could they be as strong as Xiao Mao? They glanced at each other in bewilderment. Thunder. Xiao Mao suddenly realized and shouted, this seems to be Big Brother's lightning escape technique. Ah! How is that possible? Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia were both shocked. Drifting Cloud Lake was extremely far away. How could Xiao Hua fly here? Quick, fly towards the thunder. Li Zongbao ordered loudly, perhaps Xiao Hua is being chased by the sword. Once they thought of Xiao Hua being chased by the sword, Li Zongbao and the rest were shocked. Xiao Hua had separated from them in order to avoid the transformation sword. However, after the three of them circled around outside, they ran into this place again and ran into the transformation sword again. Xiao Mao hesitated. Let's go. Now that things have come to this, to die together, is also a blessing. Fairy Hongxia waved her hand and tried to open a small gap in the connate primordial water. Sure enough, in just a short moment, the sound of thunder resounded in the sky. Chapter 2792. However, what scared Xiang Mufeng the most was that his flying speed was far slower than the rumbling thunder behind him. When he used his divine will to scan the area behind him, he was scared out of his wits. Behind Xiang Mufeng, thunder rumbled in the sky, and dark clouds covered the sky. A tall and skinny cultivator was riding on the thunder. He could only see him through his divine will earlier, but now, he was already in Xiang Mufeng's field of vision. In fact, the moment Xiang Mufeng turned around, the cultivator with flashes of lightning around him had already caught up with him, as though he was the god of thunder himself. Save me! Xiang Mufeng was practically shouting for help in his heart. The lightning flashing around Xiao Hua's body was the anger in his heart. Although he didn't release his aura or divine sense, the boundless anger in his heart had already been displayed through the lightning. Xiang Mufeng had long sensed it in his heart. Xiang Mufeng did not dare to be careless anymore. He activated the sword origin around him with all his might. The sword light trembled rapidly, as if Xiang Mufeng was frightened. As the sword light was released, a sword intent that resembled falling maple leaves flashed around him. Then, Xiang Mufeng's figure disappeared again, and a huge sword slowly appeared in mid-air. Of course, this huge sword flew extremely quickly. It left behind a yellow glow in mid-air, just like the traces of time. However, Xiang Mufeng's time was indeed too short. He had only flown a few hundred feet back, and before he could even get close to the flowing cloud-flying ship, he felt a violent aura and an indescribable sense of confinement descend from the sky. Although this restriction was not strong and was far from being able to restrict a third-grade illusory swordsman, once it got close to him, a sense of fear rose from the bottom of Xiang Mufeng's heart. It was as if he was born with it. Xiang Mufeng was a little puzzled. He didn't know what kind of mystical ability Xiao Hua used to confine him. However, just as he was puzzled, more than 10 bolts of heavenly lightning descended from the sky, answering his doubts. A bolt of lightning as thick as a thumb shot out from the dark clouds like a curved sword. It drew a beautiful arc in mid-air and struck the huge sword that Xiang Mufeng had transformed into. Hiss! An indescribable pain appeared all over Xiang Mufeng's body. Even his heart felt as if it was being pierced by dozens of small swords. Buzz! Xiang Mufeng's sword flashed, and the sound of his sword echoed through the sky. Amidst the lightning, he actually turned his sword around and slashed at Xiaohua. Humph! A cold snort came from the heavenly lightning. Even though the sound wasn't loud, the rolling heavenly lightning couldn't stop it. Xiaohua looked at Xiang Mufeng, who was charging towards him with sword qi, but he didn't even look at him. With a cold snort, he grabbed with his hand again. Dozens of heavenly lightning once again poured down like a waterfall. Moreover, with a slap of his hand, the yin-yang sword gourd flew out of the space. Two green and red spirit-slaying primary rays flew out from the gourd and followed the falling heavenly lightning towards the giant sword. On the other hand, Xiaohua's figure did not stop in front of Xiang Mufeng's huge sword. Instead, he quickly flew towards the flowing cloud airship. This was because when Xiaohua appeared, Wang Jingqiang and the rest's expressions changed. The five of them transformed into swords and increased their flying speed, chasing after the flowing cloud airship. On the flowing cloud airship, the Xiantian primordial water that was originally protecting the airship was now gradually fading away. Fairy Hongxia had already held on for so long. When she saw Xiaohua appear, she immediately relaxed. This relaxation was not a big deal. The Xiantian primordial water could no longer hold on, and it was all sucked back into the ice phoenix celestial body. As for Xiao Mao, his magic power had long been depleted. He was also desperately holding on by consuming pills to activate the dragon transformation art. Now, just like Fairy Hongxia, his magic power had also collapsed. He could no longer draw out any magic power from his body. Just like that, the flowing cloud airship stopped in mid-air. Under the five-sword qi, the three of them were like toddlers. They no longer had any strength to resist. "How dare you!" Xiaohua roared angrily. He waved his hands, and hundreds of lightning bolts rumbled and fell from mid-air. It was as if the heavenly river had burst open, carrying Xiaohua's fury as it struck the five-sword qi. However, Xiaohua was still too far away. Although the lightning bolts fell, the five huge swords had already flown to about 100 feet away from the flowing cloud airship. Under the sword light, the three of them would be easily killed. The lightning bolts were a little too far away. Go! Xiaohua opened his mouth, and the Dream Executioner and Mountain Splitter flew out at the same time. The two flying swords activated each other, and as fast as lightning, they slashed towards two of the swordsmen. Xiaohua clapped his hands, and the Tingjiao shears, which he had not used for a long time, also appeared. Similarly, a yellow light flashed and struck towards one of the swordsmen. At this time, Xiaohua ignored Xiang Mufeng. Under the bombardment of the lightning bolts, it was difficult for him to maintain his sword qi form. The moment he revealed himself, the spirit-punishing vital light had already flown close. Xiang Mufeng only had time to spit out his natal sword before the spirit-punishing vital light chopped off his head. Quick! Xiaohua pointed his finger at the yin-yang sword gourd, and the spirit-punishing vital light flashed in mid-air again, chasing after the green and red sword light that was extremely close to it. As soon as Xiaohua saw him, he used all of his methods, wanting to save the flowing cloud-flying ship in a short period of time. If it were any other time, Xiaohua's methods could not be described as undeniably powerful, and they could not be described as unbelievably powerful. However, at this critical juncture, even with the Imperial Thunder transformation, Xiaohua's speed was still a little slow. Especially when Wang Jingqiang and the rest saw how easily Xiaohua killed Xiang Mufeng, they had already hardened their hearts. They would rather die here than to kill Fairy Hongxia and the rest on the airship. However, compared to Xiao Hua's bloodshot eyes, Fairy Hongxia and the rest on the airship were abnormally calm. Especially Fairy Hongxia. Her eyes stared straight at Xiao Hua. She saw her lover covered in heavenly lightning, his feet stepping on lightning bolts. Her gaze saw her lover's might, and even more so, she saw her lover's true love. In an instant, all of her fear, and even the murderous sword light in front of her disappeared. She only wanted to look at her lover to her heart's content, and imprint him deeply in her heart. When she had the chance in her next life, she would pick him out from the masses and be intimate with him, for the rest of her life. Mang. How could Xiao Hua not see through Fairy Hongxia's gaze? His heart ached as he could not help but cry out. However, the strange thing was, this name was not Fairy Hongxia, but Mang. Aren't you tired? Why don't you stop and rest for a while, and let me tell you a story? Suddenly, a sweet voice rang out from behind Xiao Hua. A pretty girl appeared outside the flashing heavenly lightning. And at the place where the voice fell, the huge swords of the 5 sword cultivators stopped abruptly, as if they were restrained by some powerful force. In fact, the sword light slowly dissipated, and the figures of the 5 sword cultivators were revealed. However, their eyes were filled with joy, and they were all looking at Jiu Xia, who appeared behind Xiao Hua. They were like children who went to bed late, and when they heard their mother's call, they stopped playing and wanted to go into their mother's arms. Rumble, in that instant, dozens of bolts of lightning struck down from the sky, completely dispersing the sword light of the 5 people. At the same time, the joy in their eyes was also dispelled, and what replaced it was fear and confusion. However, their fear and confusion did not last long. The Dream Executor and Mountain Splitter came crashing down, piercing the foreheads of Left Jian of the Yin Yang Sword Sect and Huang Ping of the Lunar Sun Sword Sect respectively. The Spirit Executor Vital Ray came crashing down, decapitating Wang Jingqiang of the Soaring Wind Sword Sect. The Soaring Dragon Shears also flashed with a golden light, cutting Zhou Zhou of the Thousand Leaves Sword Sect in half. Pu Qingfeng of the Flat Mountain Sword Sect turned pale with fright. Just as he was about to flee, Xiao Hua chased after him for hundreds of meters and smashed his spiked club into a pulp. Looking at Pu Qingfeng's corpse falling from the sky, Xiao Hua let out a long sigh of relief. That heart-wrenching pain gradually relaxed. Turning his head, he saw Fairy Hongxia staring at him with infatuation. Xiao Hua's lips curled into a smile as he flew towards Fairy Hongxia. However, Xiao Hua was still bewildered. Dream. Who is this? Jiu Xia did not fly down, but remained in the air. He looked up at the gradually dissipating dark clouds and the hidden lightning. He then looked at the yin-yang sword gourd beside the flowing cloud airship, and the Dream Executor and Mountain Splitter flying swords. Finally, his gaze fell on the soaring dragon shears, and a smile appeared on his face. My feelings. Can I be wrong? I'm not 99% of people. Jiu Xiao's heart was filled with pride. Although I don't know how you can help me, but a cultivator with this kind of ability is actually an ordinary person. He will definitely be able to help me. Xiao Hua. You're finally here. Fairy Hongxia said happily when she saw Xiao Hua fly away. I've made you suffer. Xiao Hua landed on the airship. He originally wanted to hug Fairy Hongxia, but seeing Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao with their eyes closed, he could only reach out and hold Fairy Hongxia's soft hands. It's good that you're here. Fairy Hongxia's eyes were still fixed on Xiao Hua, unwilling to leave for a long time. These 6 people. I've already killed them. Xiao Hua said softly. You don't have to be afraid anymore. With you, I'm not afraid no matter where I am. Good, Xiao Hua let go. I'll go see Senior Li. Good, Fairy Hongxia pursed her lips and smiled. But when Xiaohua turned around, he heard a dong sound. Fairy Hongxia fell on the airship and fainted. Hongxia! Xiaohua was shocked. He understood that the so-called cultivators were all people who trained their minds, and their minds were all tough. Fairy Hongxia was already a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Her qi was restrained, and her mind was strong. Even if she was seriously injured, it would not be easy for her to faint. Her fainting was definitely not an ordinary injury. Xiaohua turned around and helped Fairy Hongxia up. He hugged her weak body and placed 2 fingers of his right hand on her meridians very naturally. In just a moment, Xiaohua frowned. Fairy Hongxia's qi and blood were both damaged, and her vitality was greatly damaged. Chapter 2793. Cough cough, Li Zongbao forced himself to open his eyes and whispered, "Junior sister Hongxia's Dharma body is injured. It was almost completely destroyed by the 6 swords." Xiaohua immediately understood. A cultivator's Dharma body was formed from blood essence. Although it could increase one's magical power, if the Dharma body was injured, especially if it was destroyed, it was almost fatal. That was direct damage to one's blood essence. Even if he could save her and wake her up, she could cultivate in the future. Thinking about the elixirs he knew, none of them had such an effect. Even the Wu Xian pill might not be effective. "She's your beloved. Not bad sister." A clear voice came from behind Xiaohua, and Jiu Xia quietly appeared behind him again. Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao looked over when they heard the voice, and they couldn't help but become extremely absent-minded. They only regained their senses after half a cup of tea's time, and their eyes were filled with fear. However, Jiu Xia didn't care about the 2 of them. Instead, she looked at Fairy Hongxia meaningfully and said, "She has a Dharma body. It's the bloodline of a spiritual beast." Xiaohua was worried about Fairy Hongxia's injuries. He didn't care about Jiu Xia's gaze and only answered indifferently. "If the Dharma body is injured or her vitality is damaged, I have a way." Jiu Xia was still confident. "I have the confidence to heal her." "But... oh... You can really do it." Xiaohua was overjoyed and said anxiously, "As long as you heal her injuries, I will definitely." "You don't have to promise anything." Jiu Xia shook her head. "You still don't know what you need to help me with. It's too early to promise now. What if you can't help me in the future? Wouldn't it be a waste of words? Also, I have the confidence to heal her, is her Dharma body. As for whether she can cultivate again, this injury will affect her future achievements. I don't know. Unless... Unless what?" Xiaohua said anxiously, "If you have any difficulties, just tell me." "I don't have any difficulties." Jiu Xia smiled. "If you know how to refine pills, there won't be any difficulties." "Yes, I know how to refine pills," Xiaohua said without hesitation. Jiu Xia's beautiful eyes looked up and down at Xiaohua and smiled. "What I'm talking about is not a simple refining technique. At the very least." Speaking up to hear, Jiu Xia seemed to be gathering his words. Xiaohua patted his storage bag and took out a medicinal pill, handing it to Jiu Xia. "This was refined by this Xiao. Is it acceptable to you?" "I-oh." Jiu Xia showed a rare look of astonishment, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He took the pill and looked at it, then nodded and said, "If this pill was refined by you, of course it's fine. Furthermore..." At this point, Jiu Xia's eyes flickered as she smiled and said, "Moreover, I have a good idea. If you want this sister's cultivation to improve, then please wait a little longer." I will give you a pill formula that will satisfy you. All right. I will listen to your orders. Although Xiaohua didn't know what Jiu Xia was asking for, he knew that she had helped to save Fairy Hongxia and the other two. He already owed her enough. She shouldn't be coveting him and the others. Of course, if he could save Fairy Hongxia, Xiaohua would be more than happy to do so even if he had to put himself in danger. Hehe, you can go now. Jiu Xia stretched out her hand and said, give sister to me. I will check on her. You go and save those two stinky men. This man with a green face, his meridians are badly damaged. He used a magic treasure that exceeded his cultivation. And this man has also exhausted his vital essence. This is the result of using the flying boat. If we don't treat them quickly, it will affect their future cultivation. Hearing this, what else could Xiaohua say? He obediently handed Fairy Hongxia to Jiu Xia and walked to Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao's side. He first looked at Xiao Mao, checked him, then patted his shoulder and said, Xiao Mao, it's been hard on you. It's nothing, big brother. You should take a look at Senior Li first. He waved the immortal slaying whip twice to block the illusory sword. Otherwise, we would have been dead. Xiao Mao said hurriedly. His cultivation was the weakest among the three, and he suffered the least damage. I know. Xiaohua sighed and took out a pile of medicinal pills and placed them in front of Xiao Mao, allowing him to take them himself. He then walked to Li Zongbao. Senior brother. At this time, Xiaohua no longer called Li Zongbao Senior Brother Li, and said in a low voice, thank you, Senior Brother. No need to thank me. Even without you, I would still do it. Li Zongbao glanced at Xiaohua without hesitation and stopped him from thanking him. Hehe, I know. Xiaohua nodded, but no matter what, I still have to thank you. Give me your hand. Why? Li Zongbao was puzzled. Senior brother, don't worry about it. Xiaohua did not explain. Cultivators had never been close to each other. Xiaohua patted Xiao Mao's shoulder just now because he considered himself to be Xiao Mao's big brother. Letting Li Zongbao hand his wrist over to Xiaohua like this was tantamount to handing his life over to Xiaohua. However, Xiaohua also believed that his friendship with Li Zongbao should have reached the point where he could entrust his life to him. Sure enough, although Li Zongbao was puzzled, he still took out his hand and let Xiaohua place 2 fingers on his pulse. Jiu Xia placed Fairy Hongxia in a corner of the flying boat and also stretched out 2 fingers. However, her 2 fingers were placed between Fairy Hongxia's eyebrows. As for herself, she looked at Xiaohua's actions with interest. Xiaohua felt Fairy Hongxia's pulse for a moment, nodded slightly and said, Senior brother, you used the immortal slaying whip twice. That magic treasure is very demanding of true essence. Senior brother's magic power is insufficient, but you still forced yourself to use it. Not only are your meridians broken, even your dantian is damaged. Xiaohua's words were very serious, but his tone was calm. However, Li Zongbao's reaction was even more unexpected, no need to say so much. You should look at Fairy Hongxia first. In the Battle of the Sword Tomb, her Dharma body was injured. Now that her Dharma body was defeated again, her injuries are several times worse than mine. Humph. I'm here. You don't have to worry about it. Jiu Xia said coldly, as if disdaining Li Zongbao's distrust. This is Jiu Xia. Only now did Xiaohua remember to end Jiu Xia and said, little brother got lost in Huan country. Thanks to her guidance, I came to Sword Peak. Otherwise, even if I didn't run to Flowing Cloud Lake, I definitely wouldn't be able to see you guys in a short period of time. Ah. You came to Sword Peak specially. Li Zongbao was shocked. Seeing Li Zongbao's shocked expression, Jiu Xia was very satisfied. She snorted coldly and no longer paid attention to Li Zongbao. Xiao Hua gave Li Zongbao a meaningful glance and said, Jiu Xia is an extremely smart woman. She seems to be a strange person. Little brother also met her by chance. As for the details, little brother will slowly tell you in the future. You may know a person for a long time without understanding their heart. Li Zongbao said earnestly. I only know that if you don't hurry and treat her, not to mention cultivation, even your life won't last long. Jiu Xia said with disdain, at this time, you still want to guard against others and yourself. Aren't you tired? Hee big brother, don't talk anymore. Xiao Hua clapped his hand and took out a spirit pill and said, this is the heaven-mending pill that little brother refined. There aren't many of them and I didn't give it to big brother. Hongxia also doesn't have it. What's the use of this spirit pill? Boo. Heaven-mending pill. You actually know how to refine heaven-mending pill? Li Zongbao was stunned and had a feeling of disbelief. Big brother still doesn't know. Other than giving birth, little brother knows how to do everything. Without a reason, I wouldn't refine this heaven-mending pill. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Puchi Jiu Xia in the distance laughed. This laughter was like a silver bell and that smile was like the bright and beautiful spring. Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao were both dumbfounded. Seeing the two of them in a daze, Jiu Xia was slightly proud. She rolled her eyes at the two of them and ignored them. Seeing Xiao Mao so absent-minded, Xiao Hua still had some understanding. However, Li Zongbao was also the same. Xiao Hua just didn't understand. It seemed that Jiu Xia had said before that if one already had a cultivation companion in one's heart or if one's love was deep, then one wouldn't be absent-minded. Could it be that Li Zongbao didn't have Kaizhuxia in his heart? No, suddenly, a trace of understanding flashed through Xiao Hua's mind. It's not that senior brother Li's willpower is insufficient, and it's also not that my willpower is greater than senior brother Li's. This was done deliberately by Jiu Xia. She is really powerful. She might really want my help, so she deliberately didn't leave a bad impression in front of me. Even when she showed her magical power in front of me, she didn't overdo it. This way, not only did she not make a fool of me, but she also made me feel proud. Just now, she made the 5 illusory swordsmen stop with just one sentence. What kind of cultivation do I have? How can I not be affected by her? Moreover, she didn't ask me to help her with anything, but she has always been kind to me. When it's time to help, can I refuse? Besides, she saved Hongxia Fairy, Xiao Mao, and senior brother Li's lives. Can I not help her? To be enemies with such a smart woman. It's really too dangerous. Xiao Hua rejoiced as he thought, however, fortunately, the situation seems to be very advantageous to this Xiao. This woman can casually kill the illusory swordsman. Although she strangely appeared in the Huan country, didn't we also go deep into the Huan country to train? Didn't she say before? She specially came to Huan country to look for someone. I'm afraid that only my Dao sect has such a miraculous divination technique. She didn't tell me her background, so she must be a proud disciple of some master in the Cultivation 3 countries. Looking at this situation, it's more likely that we'll be friends and not enemies in the future. Junior brother Xiao, earlier, what kind of elixir did you give Xiao Mao? Li Zongbao regained his senses and saw that Xiao Hua was also somewhat absent-minded. He asked in a low voice, that elixir's healing effect is very good. If it wasn't for the fact that it can't be compared to the legendary Heaven-mending pill, I would almost think that it was the heaven-mending pill. Xiaohua. You, don't blame me. The situation on that day was that when the nest was overturned, no egg would remain intact. If even the core formation masters fall, then the foundation establishment and aura refining disciples will definitely not be able to survive. As soon as he saw Xiaohua raise his eyebrows, Li Zongbao understood Xiaohua's vigilance and immediately explained via voice transmission, actually. Junior brother. With your cultivation and battle achievements, you are the #1 person in the Sword Dao Great War. Even if you have some difficulties, in the entire Dawn Rain continent, who dares to touch you? Not to mention that I and the others won't agree, even your Thunder Control sect. Can all the sects that are participating in the Sword Dao Great War agree? You also don't have to hide anything. Xiaohua knew that this was Li Zongbao's good intentions, but he understood in his heart that how could he know about his own secrets and his enemies. Therefore, he also transmitted his voice, these are all my secrets. I know what I'm doing. But... Li Zongbao shook his head again. There is no such thing as an airtight wall in this world. The current you can't hide anymore. I don't dare to say that there are people who know about it now, but I dare to say that in less than 5 years after the Dao Sword Great War, your actions, your heroic deeds, your fame, will definitely spread throughout the entire Dawn Rain continent. Sigh, Xiaohua sighed. It was indeed so. Although he disguised himself as nameless and temporarily hid from the Dao sect and the sword cultivators, this trip to Huan country had already completely exposed his strength. Even if he didn't follow Fairy Hongxia to Huan country, from Shuemingcha's tone, there were already people among the sword cultivators who knew that he was nameless. One must know that nameless reputation was now 100 times more resounding than the terrifying phoenix. If the name of the terrifying phoenix was known, then so be it. But if the identity of John Doe was known, his strength was comparable to that of a Yuanying realm cultivator. He already had a certain status on the Dawn Rain continent. How could the powerful person who sealed her not have heard of her name? Furthermore, he didn't even know that it was the 3 nascent soul cultivators from Xuanyan school and Qiqiao sect who killed Heartwarming. How could they not know? Which one of these cultivators hadn't lived for thousands of years? Which one of them was scheming and astute? How could they not investigate his background and origin? When that time came, how could he still hide? Not to mention taking revenge for Xiao Yuehong and Gong Mingwei, even he would find it difficult to protect himself. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have participated in that Sword Dao Great War. Xiaohua was somewhat regretful, but then he smiled bitterly. If he hadn't participated in the Sword Dao Great War, the cultivators of the Dao sect, would the number of people who died be limited to the current number? Not to mention the others, Cui Hongshan and the others would have died long ago. Junior brother, if you still have any hesitation, you might as well. Li Zongbao pondered for a moment, and still transmitted his voice, I have the special pardon order of the sect leader of the Utopia sect. I can plead with Reverend He Ping of the Utopia sect for you. Haha, thank you, senior brother. Xiaohua patted his chest and said, don't I also have the special pardon order of the Imperial Thunder sect? If you need anything, I can ask the sect leader of the Imperial Thunder sect for help. Alright, Li Zongbao knew that Xiaohua wasn't willing to explain clearly to him, and he couldn't force him. He nodded slightly, looked up at the millions of Meng mountains, and said in a low voice, actually, sometimes, I still miss the past. Unfortunately, this expression only stayed on his face for a moment, and then slowly disappeared. You'd better take the heavenly pill quickly. Jiu Xia said coldly from afar, if you delay any longer, you'll miss the past even more in the future. Li Zongbao glanced at Jiu Xia indifferently, sat down cross-legged, looked at the heavenly pill, opened it, and swallowed it, and began to regulate his breathing. Xiao Hua, come here for a moment. Jiu Xia said. All right, Xiao Hua agreed, and released his divine sense. He looked around, and then walked towards Jiu Xia. However, when he passed by Xiao Mao, he didn't forget to say, Xiao Mao, when you're done regulating your breathing, put away the 6 illusory swords just now. Then, without waiting for Xiao Mao's agreement, he walked quickly to Jiu Xia's side, squatted down, looked at Hongsha Fairy, and asked in a low voice, what plan do you have? Well, I've roughly looked at it, and I've also made some calculations. Jiu Xia said bluntly, as if she was an old acquaintance of Xiao Hua, sister's primordial qi has been greatly damaged, and her bloodline has been destroyed, which is indeed very serious. Originally, I thought that if I could repair her bloodline, her primordial qi would be slowly nourished, and her dharma body would also be able to recover. However, this method should be inferior, and it's not good for her Tao foundation, and it would be difficult for her dharma body to achieve great success in the future. Xiao Hua knew that Jiu Xia's thoughts were meticulous, and this was just a prelude, so he didn't reply, and quietly listened to her explanation. Its effect is 30% greater than that of ordinary medicinal pills. And, perhaps yours is even more. However, the Parasol Spring pill that I gave sister just now, although it was also a first-grade spirit pill, there was actually a strand of star power condensed inside for some reason. This star power is an extraterrestrial object, different from the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in Xiaoyu continent. This star power can not only increase the medicinal effect of spirit pills, it can also cause them to mutate. Mutate? Xiao Hua suddenly realized. He immediately thought of the Parasol Spring pill that the Zhu mother and daughter had taken in Jingbei City. It can break the curse talisman. Kill the taboo. And that's the general idea. Jiu Xia's eyes glowed with a strange light, however, there are really too many mutations. I only know a little. But Xiao Hua was puzzled again. These 2 types of medicinal pills were refined by me personally. It seems that there isn't any special difference. Gugu, Jiu Xia covered her mouth and laughed. I didn't ask you what the difference was when you refined them. I really don't know. Even if you asked me, I wouldn't be able to answer. Xiao Hua scratched his head. Then you'd better think carefully. Jiu Xia said, if you can refine another spirit pill that is similar to the Parasol Spring pill, the benefits to sister. I won't say more. You know it clearly in your heart. And I know. Xiao Hua nodded. This matter involved Fairy Hongxia, so he naturally had to think carefully. In the following days, they spent their time on the airship, unable to find a suitable place to stay. Fortunately, there were no swordsmen here, nor were there any battles between soul cultivators and swordsmen. Xiao Mao's injuries were the lightest, and he would be able to move freely after 3 days. He collected the storage pouches of the 6 swordsmen, and dealt with the corpses as usual. Then, he found a suitable place 100 miles away. After another 3 days, Li Zongbao was finally able to move. Only then did he activate the flowing cloud flying ship and fly to this place. As for Fairy Hongxia, who was the most seriously injured, she still hadn't woken up. However, Xiao Hua believed in his Parasol Spring pill. Moreover, through taking her pulse, he knew that Fairy Hongxia was steadily recovering. Xiao Mao was looking for a valley at the bottom of two mountains. This was rarely seen in Huan country. Xiao Hua and Xiao Mao steered the flying boat to land at the foot of the mountain. Xiao Hua very naturally clapped his hands and took out the capital star array spirit talisman again. Jiu Xia was dumbfounded when he saw Xiao Hua casting out the talismans with great familiarity and the capital star formation slowly taking shape. He exclaimed in disbelief, "Xiao Hua, this is the capital star formation. Oh. You really know everything." Xiao Hua was a little embarrassed. It was as if everything was no longer a secret in Jiu Xia's eyes. He had used talismans countless times to arrange them, but no one had ever discovered them. Before this star array was even arranged, it was seen through by Jiu Xia. "It's the capital star array," Xiao Hua replied. "You really have a lot of knowledge. You even know this. This array, where did you get it?" Jiu Xia asked anxiously. "I made it myself." Xiao Hua also planned to keep it a secret from Jiu Xia, so he blinked. You also know how to make talismans and array talismans." Jiu Xia was stunned. This answer was clearly out of her expectations. Yes, except for giving birth." After Xiao Hua said it, he felt that it was inappropriate. He lowered his voice and said, "I know everything else." Jiu Xia didn't care at all. She said anxiously, "Then, can you help me make a set?" After saying that, Jiu Xia was a little regretful. She said anxiously, "Forget it, pretend I didn't say anything. This item is so precious." "Oh. You want to ask me for help?" Xiao Hua asked. "Alas, I don't even know what I want to ask you for help." Jiu Xia sighed. "From this, maybe it's this array. Or maybe it's not. It's okay, this array is yours." Xiao Hua waved his hand. "You saved Hongxia, this is my thanks." Xiao Hua, you are so nice." Jiu Xia happily jumped on the foothill. Her braids swayed behind her head, looking very cute. This moment of happiness really came from the bottom of her heart. It seemed that she hadn't felt like this for a long time. Her smile was as brilliant as a mountain flower and as graceful as the bright moonlight. The slyness and intelligence on her face had long been covered by this joy. This is how a little sister should be. Xiao Hua was also happy to see this. That. Xiao Mao was unhappy. He twisted his fingers and said, "Big brother, you don't have to be so obvious. You have so many good things, why didn't you take them out earlier?" Why didn't I take them out earlier?" Xiao Hua rolled his eyes at him and said, "You have eyes but can't see." "Fine, I won't argue with you." Xiao Mao said with a smile, "You gave them to this one, you might as well give one to me." Cough cough, Li Zongbao, who was originally cultivating with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. Although he was only coughing, his eyes were very obvious. From the looks of it, Li Zongbao had already learned a lesson from his experience with medicinal pills. As long as there was something good, then, it was better to open his mouth first. "This is a spiritual talisman," Xiao Hua said with a little exasperation. "Without spiritual beast fur and blood, where do you want me to refine it for you?" "Spiritual talisman," Xiao Mao said with surprise, "so Big Brother also knows how to refine spiritual talismans. This is the first time I've heard of it. And, not bad." Li Zongbao's meridians were damaged, and his mental cultivation methods seemed to have some flaws. Seeing that the two of them were only praising him and not refining the materials, Xiao Hua could only bitterly smile. Chapter 2796. This pill formula was divided into 6 grades. The main ingredients of each grade were similar, but the age of the main ingredients and the amount of each main ingredient were different. However, when it came to the supplementary ingredients, the differences were huge. The most important thing was that Jiu Xia had written down the reasons for these differences very clearly. Rather than saying that this was a flying shadow pill formula, it was better to say that this was a simple pill formula analysis technique. Many thanks. Xiaohua raised his head and said in a low voice. He. Jiu Xia pursed her lips and said, "Don't thank me, this is already made. I just showed it to you. Moreover, this pill formula doesn't have a refining method, so it's useless for others to have it. Of course, you can use this pill formula, but you can't leak it out. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. And I know what I'm doing." Xiaohua naturally knew the importance of this pill formula. It was probably a secret technique of Jiu Xia's sect. It was already good that he could refine this flying shadow pill, so how could he dare to leak it out? "I believe you." Jiu Xia nodded and took out a storage bag. "This is the material I collected in my early years. Take it." "Don't." Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand and said, "I'd better take a look first. There are many things in this pill formula that I've never seen before. I still need to ask you for advice." "All right." Jiu Xia tilted her head in thought for a moment, then said, "What you know is what you know. What you don't know is what you don't know. Xiaohua, with your cultivation method, you'll definitely go very far." After that, Xiaohua activated the capital star array and casually wrote down the method of setting up the capital star array on 3 jade slips. He threw 2 of them to Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao to shut their mouths, and handed the last one to Jiu Xia. Thus, the 4 of them each stayed in one place and started to comprehend the jade slips. The flying shadow pill's pill formula was extremely detailed, but it was also strange because there was spirit blood inside the pill formula. Jiu Xia had already said that it contained spiritual blood before he got the pill formula. However, Xiaohua didn't care. He even thought that he had misheard. When he had first obtained the jade slip, he had used his divine will to look at the spirit plants, as well as their names and shapes. Some of the spirit plants had different names, but based on their shapes, he could tell that they existed in the space. As for the spirit blood, he had ignored it. When he started looking at the first grade flying shadow pill, he realized that there was a type of spirit blood in each grade after the main ingredient, and each spirit blood had a different name. Damn it, Xiaohua suddenly realized something. This flying shadow pill. I'm afraid it uses spiritual blood as a catalyst to stimulate the cultivator's bloodline and create a dharma body. This is the secret technique that the cultivation aristocratic families really want. Jiu Xia, Xiaohua opened his eyes and asked in a low voice, "The spirit blood inside this flying shadow pill can only be used after it has been refined?" "Of course." Jiu Xia nodded matter-of-factly. "How can spirit blood be used if it isn't refined? You're an alchemist yourself, there's no reason you don't know, right?" But then, Jiu Xia suddenly froze and said with some realization, "Could it be, you don't know how to refine spirit blood?" Xiaohua bitterly smiled. He knew how to refine spirit blood, but he didn't know that there was also refining spirit blood in alchemy. After thinking for a moment, Xiaohua said, "I know how to refine spirit blood, but I don't know if it's the same as what you're talking about." Jiu Xia shook his head. "I only know how to refine spirit blood, I don't know the specifics." "All right." Xiaohua was helpless and could only try his best. Since it was refining spirit blood, the demon realm's blood refining technique should be useful. Half a day later, Xiaohua and Jiu Xia didn't stay idle and finally thoroughly understood the Flying Shadow Pill's pill formula. Normally, Xiaohua's alchemy skills were already very good, and he knew all the spirit plants like the back of his hand. However, the spirit plants in this pill formula were different from the ones he knew, so he had to ask them one by one. There were even some spirit plants that Xiaohua didn't have and Jiu Xia didn't collect. According to the pill formula, Xiaohua found similar spirit plants in his space and discussed the effects of these spirit plants with Jiu Xia. Jiu Xia didn't know much about spirit blood, but he had some knowledge about spirit plants. After discussing with Xiaohua, they complemented each other. After half a day, not only did Xiaohua have a thorough understanding of the pill formula, he also had a new understanding of the planting and refining of some spirit plants. You're really old and learn. Xiaohua sighed, as if Jiu Xia's words had opened a new door to alchemy for him. The cultivation foundation of this dawn rain continent is really unfathomable. Another half a day later, Xiaohua brought back the spirit herbs and spirit blood that Jiu Xia had collected. He compared them with the pill recipe and the spirit herbs in his space. He sorted out the materials needed to refine the Flying Shadow Pill and returned the bag of holding to Jiu Xia. Jiu Xia looked at the spiritual herbs that had barely been touched and the spiritual blood that had been taken away. Her heart was filled with astonishment. However, her face remained calm and she did not say anything. It was as if everything was within her calculations. After putting away the storage pouch, Jiu Xia asked, "Are you ready? Are you going to refine pills on the flying boat?" Have you found the reason for the difference in the pills? Xiaohua smiled bitterly. In these past few days, when he was looking at the pill formula, he was also thinking about the difference between the earliest parasol pill and the later pills. He was even thinking about the difference between the rejuvenation pill and the ageless pill. The rejuvenation pill and the ageless pill could be understood. After all, one was refined with the power of heavenly thunder and the other was refined with ordinary methods. The power of heavenly thunder was the reason why the rejuvenation pill could bring back the spring. However, Xiaohua couldn't understand the reason why the parasol pill was unique. It seemed there wasn't any difference. It wasn't until the end that Xiaohua recalled the details of his alchemy that he finally had an idea. When he was refining the parasol pill, he was guarding the side of the pill furnace. But when he was refining other pills, he wasn't completely guarding the side of the pill furnace. He even left the cave to go to other places. Maybe it's because my character is good and I can refine pills by guarding beside the pill furnace. Xiaohua could only wipe his face like this. Now that Jiu Xia asked, he naturally couldn't say the reason. He only looked around and said, "Naturally, I can't refine pills on the flying boat. It's too noisy and will delay your cultivation. I'd better find a cave. As for the difference, I have some ideas. I can only give it a try. You take a drop of spirit blood for every pill. Are you planning to refine one pill for every pill?" Jiu Xia asked tentatively. "Can you only refine one pill at a time?" Xiaohua asked back. "Oh. You can refine 2 pills?" Jiu Xia was slightly puzzled. "Oh, I understand. Your pill formula has the weight of 1 flying shadow pill." Xiaohua suddenly understood. "That's right." Jiu Xia nodded. "If you can refine 2 flying shadow pills at a time, the sun will rise from the west. Ha ha ha, if you use 2 drops of spirit blood, you can naturally do it." Xiaohua laughed. "I can only use 1 drop of spirit blood." Jiu Xia nodded seriously. "Can you refine 2 drops of spirit blood at a time?" This. Xiaohua was astonished. He had refined 9 drops of spirit blood at a time, but he didn't know if his refining method was the same as what Jiu Xia said. Try refining the first-grade flying shadow pill first. Jiu Xia laughed. If you fail, it doesn't matter. Sister can also use the ungraded flying shadow pill. Xiaohua knew that the ungraded flying shadow pill was a pill that didn't require spirit blood. It could only help Fairy Hongxia recover and repair her Dharma body. It couldn't achieve the effect of breaking and rebuilding. For Hongxia, I will also refine the first-grade flying shadow pill. Xiaohua looked at the still unconscious Fairy Hongxia and said firmly. In fact, when Xiaohua took the Wu Xian pill, he wanted to wake Fairy Hongxia up. However, Jiu Xia insisted that he couldn't wake her up after using the pill. The longer she was unconscious, the better it was for the Dharma body's recovery. Xiaohua didn't quite understand the meaning of this, but he still listened to Jiu Xia's arrangement. I believe you. Jiu Xia nodded with a smile, as if she had returned to being the girl who had everything under control. In the valley, there were still small caves. Xiaohua found one a little further away. When he entered, he clapped his hands and took out several puppets. Looking at the puppets gradually enlarging the cave, Xiaohua casually waved his hands and prepared to take out the three-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern furnace, but at this moment, Xiaohua suddenly froze. Cold sweat seeped out of his back. Chapter 2797. What scared Xiaohua the most was that Jiu Xia had let nature take its course. Everything was untraceable, and Xiaohua could not help but do it. It was true that Xiaohua had intended to reveal some of his cultivation, but he had never thought of revealing everything about himself. How could Xiaohua explain the several tens of thousands of years of medicinal age of the spiritual herbs used in alchemy? However, when Xiaohua left Jiu Xia's side, he came to a realization. However, when Xiaohua thought about it, it seemed that everything did not allow him to have any doubts. When Xiaohua first met Jiu Xia only asked for his help. She did not mention any rewards or conditions. Then, Jiu Xia said that he had to come to Sword Peak. Otherwise, Fairy Hongxia would lose her life. Although he was a little doubtful, he still came. When he met Fairy Hongxia and the rest in danger, although he did not show it, he already trusted Jiu Xia in his heart. After that, Jiu Xia's words saved Fairy Hongxia's life and death. However, Jiu Xia didn't even say a word of thanks. He even told Xiaohua very clearly that this had nothing to do with asking for his help. This was truly a righteous man. It made Xiaohua trust Jiu Xia again. After that, Jiu Xia took out the flying shadow pill formula that she had collected and came up with the best, middle, and worst plans to save Fairy Hongxia. This made Xiaohua shed tears of gratitude, and he had already let his guard down. However, when he thought about it again, while saving Fairy Hongxia, Jiu Xia was also making use of Xiaohua to refine pills. In this world, there has never been a lack of smart people. But to be so smart, to let someone be sold and help her count the spiritual stones, and even bargain for her, how many are there? Xiaohua smiled bitterly. This does not seem to be smart. If it is the power of charm or the art of seduction, that is the real deal. Thinking of this, Xiaohua secretly released his Buddhist awareness. Sure enough, Jiu Xia sat beside Fairy Hongxia, guarding her. It was fine to say that she cared about Fairy Hongxia, or that she wanted to kidnap Fairy Hongxia, but she did not notice that Xiaohua was opening up a cave. She always did the most appropriate thing at the most appropriate time, and would not let others have too much suspicion. A cultivator who can kill 5 third-grade illusory sword cultivators with one sentence actually called a late-stage foundation establishment female cultivator sister. Isn't this a bit too much? Xiaohua thought of how Jiu Xia called Fairy Hong Xia sister. Previously, it was extremely intimate, but now he felt that it was too strange. But I am just Xiaohua. Even if I am nameless. What is worthy of Jiu Xia's desire? Xiaohua really couldn't figure it out. With some inexplicable apprehension and caution, Xiaohua activated the puppets a little more. Soon, he hastily opened up a cave. Taking advantage of the fact that Jiu Xia wasn't paying attention, he hurriedly put away the puppets. However, just as Xiaohua took out the pill furnace and was about to preheat it, Jiu Xia came. Xiaohua, can I see how you refine pills? Jiu Xia's smile was very beautiful, like a little sister talking to her brother calmly. This. Xiaohua hesitated, not daring to look at Jiu Xia's face. He lowered his head and said, "This Xiao has already thought about it. One of the differences between refining pills is that when Xiao Mao first refined the parasol pill, this Xiao refined it alone, and there was no one watching." Oh? So that's the case, then I can only not watch. Jiu Xia did not have the slightest bit of awkwardness or displeasure. Her voice was still very pleasant to hear. "I still want to see how this first-grade pill is refined." "Hee, wait until this Xiao refines it, then you can see." Xiaohua said with a smile. "Okay, you refine it yourself." Jiu Xia skipped out again. When she reached the entrance of the cave, she laughed and said, "Leave big sister to me. I will also tidy up that secret technique and give it to you in a while." That secret technique also targets 6th-grade pills, so it is a bit different. You and sister are the closest, so you have to help her. AI. This Jiu Xia. Should I trust her? Or should I not? Xiaohua only dared to raise his head at this time, looking at Jiu Xia's graceful back, and thought with some worry. At this time, although Xiaohua was a little confused and even worried about Fairy Hong Xia, his alchemy skills had reached the point of perfection, so refining the flying shadow pill was not difficult at all. He threw in the spiritual herbs one by one, and when the spiritual herbs turned into juice in the furnace, he waved a spell to quench the impurities inside. As the green smoke was produced in the furnace, wisps of medicinal fragrance rushed to his face, and Xiaohua's heart gradually calmed down again. After all, Jiu Xia looked like a budding girl, but her magical powers were unfathomable. Xiaohua was definitely not her opponent. Why would someone like her, who could easily kill him, want to scheme against him? Instead of being on tenterhooks, it was better to face her calmly. Perhaps, everything was just Xiaohua's own guess. Of course, even if she coveted the flying shadow pill, he would help her refine it and get the pill formula. Why not? In addition to being extra careful, Xiaohua was really at his wit's end. Spells were cast one after another, and the Samadhi true fire was like a dragon surging outside the three-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern furnace. This kind of fire control method was simply beyond the reach of ordinary alchemists. Even seeing that the pill furnace was fine for the time being, Xiaohua even diverted a bit of attention to refine the jade talisman. In fact, as early as when Xiaohua was refining the fire talisman, he wanted to refine the talisman of the capital star array into a jade talisman. Unfortunately, this guy never had time to do what he wanted to do, so he had been delaying it. Until now, when refining the flying shadow pill, he had leisure. After all of the medicinal liquids had been refined, Xiaohua began to fuse the pills according to his previous understanding of the flying shadow pill's pill formula. Generally speaking, fusing pills was the key to refining pills. The amount, order, and timing of each medicinal liquid were all related to whether or not the pill could be formed. The true pill formula contained the essence of the pill refining method. Without these specific methods, the possibility of refining a pill was next to none. Fortunately, Xiaohua's alchemy skills had always been self-taught. After the spiritual herbs of the flying shadow pill were replaced by him, he was even more confident. After a few days, he managed to fuse dozens of medicinal liquids into a fist-sized pill liquid. At this time, Xiaohua understood that the part he was familiar with had been completed. The next step was to refine the spiritual blood. Xiaohua secretly released a strand of Buddhist consciousness and looked at Jiu Xia. Jiu Xia was still sitting next to Red Dawn Fairy, and there was no change. On the contrary, Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao looked at the cave impatiently, as if they were worried about him not coming out. Especially Xiao Mao, who was sniffing from time to time, as if he was inhaling the medicinal fragrance. Red Dawn, why hasn't she woken up yet? After so long, Xiaohua was puzzled again. Even if she was seriously injured, she should have woken up by now after taking the parasol pill. Could it be that this was done by Jiu Xia? If I don't refine the flying shadow pill, Red Dawn won't be able to wake up. Withdrawing his Buddhist consciousness, Xiaohua helplessly released the spiritual fire to refine the drop of spiritual blood known as the Swift Sparrow. Xiaohua had already helped Li Zongbao refine his essence blood, so controlling the refining of this spiritual blood was not a difficult task. However, what shocked Xiaohua the most was that as the spirit fire tempered the spirit blood, a 3-foot-tall shadow gradually appeared within the rain-like spirit blood. The formation of this shadow was 10 times more difficult than the formation of the shadow within Li Zongbao's spirit blood. Xiaohua actually refined it for a total of 9 days, and after taking dozens of spiritual power replenishing pills, he finally refined the complete shadow. Lucky! Xiaohua secretly wiped away his cold sweat. Just the spiritual blood of a first-grade spirit pill is so difficult to refine. No wonder this flying shadow pill. Even Jiu Xia couldn't refine it. Moreover, it's a good thing that I have already refined my essence blood, otherwise, I definitely wouldn't have been able to complete it in 9 days. Furthermore, with my current pill refining skills, I can barely extend the time needed to refine the pill. I'm afraid that this pill will condense before I finish refining the spiritual blood, right? Go, Xiaohua urged the spiritual blood, and the shadow of the swift sparrow was about to enter the pill furnace. Quick, an indescribable cry came out from the shadow. The blood shadow of the swift sparrow that had been completely refined seemed to have gained some intelligence. It knew that the alchemy furnace was its only way out, so it started to struggle and wanted to escape from Xiaohua's control. The sound of the swift sparrow was extremely loud, and Jiu Xia, Li Zongbao, and Xiao Mao all heard it. Xiao Mao couldn't help but rush to the entrance of the cave, as if he wanted to help. As for Jiu Xia, he didn't even frown, and his body naturally didn't move. He only slightly opened his eyes, and then closed them again. Li Zongbao turned around, looked at Jiu Xia and Fairy Hong Xia, and walked over to Xiao Mao's side, and whispered to him. The two of them knew that Xiaohua was refining pills inside the cave. Although they were worried, they didn't rush in. Seeing that the blood shadow of the swift sparrow was so unruly, Xiaohua wasn't alarmed, and was instead happy. This level of spiritual blood was the real spiritual blood. To deal with this kind of blood shadow, Xiaohua already had a method. Hundreds of soul strands were released from his law eyes, and tightly bound the blood shadow. Swift. The swift sparrow's shadow struggled a few times, but how could it be a match for Xiaohua's soul strands? Go, Xiaohua sneered, and urged the soul strands to pull the 3 qi-long shadow, and threw it into the pill furnace. Immediately after, several pill refining techniques were sent in, and a formless imprisonment was born from the pill furnace, enveloping the swift sparrow's blood shadow, and forcefully dragging it into the pill liquid. Good. Seeing that the pill refining techniques were also effective against the blood shadow, Xiaohua was overjoyed. Immediately after, he sent the pill refining techniques into the pill furnace, and the magic power formed ripples that converged into the pill liquid, firmly imprisoning the swift sparrow's blood shadow inside. Chapter 2798. Not only that, the blood shadow of the swift sparrow struggled a few times in the pill elixir and gradually merged with the pill elixir. So that's how it is. Xiaohua's divine sense never left the pill furnace and even stayed near the pill elixir. He could clearly see that among the dozens of spirit herbs of the flying shadow pill, other than the sovereign, minister, and 5 elements, there was also the ability to melt and confine the spirit blood shadow. The different pill elixirs formed thin threads that tightly wrapped around the blood shadow and slowly seeped in. The art of alchemy is also limitless. Xiaohua sighed inwardly. Big brother. Xiao Mao's voice came several times. No matter. Xiaohua finally had the time to say, I'm very normal here. In a few days, I'll be able to form the pill. Good. Xiao Mao and the others heard and then nodded. On the contrary, Jiu Xiao's indifferent face revealed some astonishment. The fusion of the flying shadow pill didn't need to be said. Because of the addition of the spirit blood, the time needed was also extended. In the end, it took a total of 49 days for the pill to be formed. When Xiaohua finally sent the pill-forming technique into the phoenix pattern 3-legged vermilion bird furnace, a clear sound rang out. The top of the phoenix pattern cauldron opened by itself. A fist-sized bird flew out of the cauldron and flew out of the cauldron. Good. As expected of the flying shadow pill. Xiaohua's divine sense clearly saw that the swift sparrow was a shadow. A successful flying shadow pill could actually have a shadow. This was the first time Xiaohua had seen it, so he definitely didn't expect it before. Fall, Xiaohua waved his sleeve and covered it with the heaven and earth sleeve. Without any suspense, the swift sparrow fell into Xiaohua's hand. A pill the size of a thumb was spinning in the air. This pill was different from the ones Xiaohua had refined before. On the outside of the pill, there were fine pill veins that were faintly discernible. These pill veins formed the figure of a swift sparrow, as if it would fly out at any moment. The pill was blood red, and there was a faint layer of blood red mist inside, protecting the pill. Even Xiaohua's divine sense couldn't penetrate it. The pill image of this first-grade flying shadow pill was actually so beautiful, completely different from the ugly pill that Xiaohua had refined earlier. Congratulations, Xiaohua. Jiu Xia stood at the entrance of the cave with a smile. He didn't step into the cave as he spoke loudly. I still have to thank fellow Daoist for the pill formula. Xiaohua glanced at the pill furnace that was still surrounded by the true samadhi fire and walked to the entrance of the cave. He placed the flying shadow pill in front of Jiu Xia and said, I wonder if fellow Daoist is interested in this pill. Jiu Xia did not stand on ceremony. He took the flying shadow pill and examined it. Then, he smiled and said, Your alchemy skills are indeed extraordinary. It far exceeds my expectations. This pill should be a first-grade high-grade pill. Then, 5 colors once again appeared in Jiu Xiao's eyes. After the brilliance passed, Jiu Xia slightly frowned and said curiously, Xiaohua, although this flying shadow pill is very high quality, but it conforms to the norm. It is far from the star energy in the Wu Tsang pill from before. Ah. Is that so? Xiaohua stared blankly. He couldn't help but scratch his head as his brows wrinkled. This is already not bad. Jiu Xia hurriedly smiled and said, This pill can already be consumed. Do you want to continue refining the second-grade flying shadow pill? Or do you want me to wake sister up and consume it? As expected. Xiaohua thought to himself, Red Cloud's body, it was indeed Zhou Xia's doing. But she just admitted it. This makes me unable to. Do you think it's better to wake her up now? Or wake her up later? Xiaohua pushed the question to Zhou Xia. Naturally it's better to wake her up later. Zhou Xia smiled and said, in this way, not only will sister have a better harvest, I will also be able to obtain a first-grade flying shadow pill. Is she really fine? Xiaohua asked worriedly. Of course. Zhou Xia nodded. Right now, sister is in hibernation. Although she is unconscious, her body is repairing itself. This kind of repair is far more effective than when a person is awake. Moreover, the effect on the body is far-reaching. Or rather, it is more in line with the heavenly Tao. That's right. Xiaohua secretly nodded. This Zhou Xia is right. Big brother Xiao Mao and Li Zongbao spoke again after Zhou Xia. It was very obvious that Zhou Xia grasped the timing extremely well. When she should appear, she would definitely appear first. When she shouldn't appear, she would definitely not appear. And it's fine. Little brother's spirit pill has already been formed. Xiaohua looked at the two people's concern and said to Li Zongbao, Red Cloud's injury has the most basic guarantee. Little brother will discuss with Miss Zhou Xia and see if we can take another step. Stop before going too far. Li Zongbao said indifferently and turned his head. After taking 2 steps, another indifferent sentence floated over, going too far is as bad as not going far enough. If it was someone else, they would naturally think more and perhaps stop here. Unfortunately, Xiaohua had always pursued perfection. That day when he was condensing his core in the sword tomb, facing the baptism of the 3 gold lightning tribulation, he did not hesitate to take out his primordial spirit that could benefit from the light. Whatever flying sword, whatever small dipper, he gave it all out. To put it bluntly, he was a person who wanted to take advantage of the netherworld even after death. How could he stop? After resting for half a day, Xiaohua threw the second batch of spirit herbs into the 3-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern furnace one by one. This time, Zhou Xia did not rush him at all. Even the first-grade flying shadow pill, Zhou Xia only appreciated it for a moment before returning it to Xiaohua. She clearly said that she would definitely not accept the flying shadow pill if she did not have any extra flying shadow pills. Seeing Zhou Xia so upright, Xiaohua almost doubted his own thoughts. Looking at the gradually forming liquid pill, Xiaohua then took out some jade essence and was about to continue refining jade talismans. However, just as the jade essence melted into liquid, Xiaohua suddenly froze. How could he know how to refine talismans when he was refining the Wucang pill? Other than guarding the pill furnace and meditating, there was nothing else he could do. Furthermore, he had even dozed off in the pill room of Yellow Flower Ridge. Could it be related to meditating? Xiaohua thought for a moment, then stretched out his hand and put the liquid jade into his space. He looked around himself and really closed his eyes to meditate. Outside the cave, Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao were comprehending the capital star array. Even Zhou Xia wanted this array, so Li Zongbao and the others naturally knew that this array was good stuff. Even though Zhou Xia was sitting beside Fairy Hong Xia with her eyes closed, looking calm on the surface, her heart was filled with an avalanche of emotions. Although Xiaohua knew how to refine pills, he did not know the difficulty of refining the first-grade flying shadow pill, let alone Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao. But Zhou Xia knew. She had collected so many materials for the flying shadow pill in her storage bag, so why was she still unable to refine the flying shadow pill? The fundamental reason was that she did not trust the alchemists she knew. In other words, as far as she knew, there were not many alchemists who could refine the flying shadow pill. But this Xiao Hua, this cultivator from the Imperial Thunder sect whom she met for the first time, actually refined it so easily. Moreover, it was a first-grade spirit pill. In fact, when she told Xiao Hua about the flying shadow pill, Zhou Xia's original intention was to take out the pill formula for the non-grade flying shadow pill. She did not plan to tell him about the remaining 6th-grade pills. But it was also at that moment, in a flash, she felt that Xiao Hua was the person she was looking for, the person who could help her, who might be able to fulfill her wish. Or perhaps she was also testing Xiao Hua. If she could not fulfill her wish, how could Xiao Hua help her complete such a difficult task? Although it seemed that Zhou Xia trusted Xiao Hua very much and told him everything, she did not hold back the pill formula for the flying shadow pill and even took out the spirit blood she had painstakingly collected. But in her heart, she really did not have any confidence. She did not have any confidence at all. And it wasn't that she didn't want to see how Xiao Hua refined pills, and it wasn't that she didn't want to peek at Xiao Hua's progress in refining pills, but she knew that at this time, she could only wait. She could only obtain Xiao Hua's trust without arousing his suspicion and complete her important task. That task, she felt that it was almost impossible for her to complete. Just as Zhou Xia's thoughts were running wild, an inexplicable palpitation suddenly appeared in her heart. At the same time, a familiar aura appeared, star power. Zhou Xia almost did not need to open her eyes. That wild, tyrannical, and incomparably pure star power aura seeped into her body through this not far distance. Xiao Hua can really draw the power of the outer realm's origin stars. Zhou Xia's heart was beating wildly. Who exactly is he? Even at this moment, Zhou Xia still didn't dare to pry into Xiao Hua's actions in the cave. Xiao Hua had given her too many surprises, and these surprises didn't seem like they should be counted as surprises. Perhaps, other than this extremely difficult matter in front of me, I should also be able to land on him. Zhou Xia slightly opened her eyes and looked at Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao in the distance, who did not know what was going on at all, and thought to herself. At the same time, the 5-colored brilliance in Zhou Xia's eyes appeared again. Outside the cave where Xiao Hua was, a faintly discernible brilliance was like a pillar of light that pierced the sky. It was the endless star power that fell into Xiao Hua's body. Zhou Xia only took a glance and hurriedly closed her eyes. Her eyes returned to their original state. It's a pity, although Xiao Hua has such a remarkable ability, his cultivation is really too weak. The difficult task in front of me, he might not be able to complete it, let alone my matter. Zhou Xia sighed slightly. I still have to wait. Then, Zhou Xia restrained her thoughts, as if she did not see the starlight at all. She did not dare to spy on what kind of remarkable ability Xiao Hua was using in the cave. But if Zhou Xia really did spy on him, she was afraid her jaw would drop to the ground. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.